Good evening and welcome to the August 15 meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner?
Here.
Councilmember Dish?
Here.
Councilmember Griswold?
Here.
Councilmember Song?
Here.
Councilmember Grand? Absent. Councilmember Radina?
Here.
Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Iyer?
Here.
Councilmember Nelson?
Here.
Councilmember Briggs?
Here.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor? Opposed? The agenda is approved. Do we have communications today from our city from our city administrator?
No, Mayor.
Thank you. We now come to public comment reserve time. Public comment reserve time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by contacting our city clerk. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. We can only have one person speaking at a time. Our clerk will notify you and folks may not delegate their time to others. When you have 30 seconds remaining, the light will identify that your time is getting close to done. When the beep goes, your time is expired. When your time is expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Our first speaker today is Nathan Chesterman.
Good evening. Hi, everyone. My name is Nathan Chesterman. I've lived in Ann Arbor for about 8 years. I did 2 degrees here, and now I work for Mathematical Policy Research just across the street. I want to tell you about something I'm going through right now and why you should introduce and pass the Right to Renew ordinance, which is on tonight's agenda, item DC4. So this past spring, I emailed my landlord to renew my lease, and they told me that they had leased my house to someone else. They had given me no notice that they had listed the house, no notification that it was time to renew the lease, and no reason why they had leased my home to someone else. My roommates and I are quiet and clean, so essentially what our landlords did, the end effect, is that they evicted us with no cause. And I'm actually in the middle of my move right now, but I thought it was important to take the time and talk to you about why renters in Ann Arbor need the right to renew their leases. First of all, this issue affects all renters. Right now, the Ann Arbor we live in is one where landlords can evict their tenants basically at their discretion with virtually no consequences. Landlords might say that only a few graduate students care about this issue, but that's not true. All renters live in the shadow of the possibility that their landlord might displace them for whatever reason. The petition that Ann Arbor Rising for Tenants circulated has over 700 signatures from students, non-students, and even some homeowners, indicating that there's broad agreement that renters should not be displaced from their homes, or at the very least, if they are, they should be, their moving costs should be offset. Second of all, renters badly need accountability. Landlords might say that the right to renew would prevent them from evicting bad tenants, and that's just not true. The ordinance would still allow them to evict people who have violated the terms of their lease, but for gray area cases or for no cause cases, landlords would need to give a reason or, again, offset the costs of moving. I will never find out why we were displaced from our houses, and I think it's absurd and frankly unacceptable that we allow this to go on in our city. Lastly, this is a matter of affordability, which is an issue I believe many of you campaigned on. My move is costing me about $1,500, maybe more. I wasn't exactly prepared for it, and it's wiping out a good swath of my savings. According to the Federal Reserve, the 3/4 of households, middle-income households in the country can't afford an unexpected expense of $400. So many people in our community would not be able to bounce back from this kind of impact on their life. This is why relocation assistance payments that are included in the right to renew legislation are so critical for preserving the diversity and vibrancy of our community. So as you are considering the legislation later tonight, I urge you to consider what will happen to our community if landlords are allowed to continue displacing tenants unchecked. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Claire Armisen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Claire Arneson, a rising fifth-year grad student at the University of Michigan studying physics. I've lived in Ann Arbor since May 2018, when I signed my first lease, less than 2 months after accepting my admission offer to study here. Like many Ann Arbor renters, both students and working families and adults, I was subject to signing a lease on a deadline imposed by the offered opportunity to work and study, not my own schedule or desires. The proposed right to renew will help both renters new to the area and existing renters by ensuring that leases are not filled more than half a year before they are scheduled to begin, and providing stability for Ann Arbor residents planning their living arrangements. Without the right to renew, tenants can be denied a renewal for reasons outside the tenant's control, as we just heard from Nathan, and leases can be filled before potential students or workers have even been offered the opportunity to live and work in Ann Arbor. City Council exists to serve residents, 53% of which are renters in Ann Arbor, when the existing system fails to do so. The right to renew will make significant progress toward achieving this. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Amir Fleischman.
Hello. My name is Amir Fleischman. I'm one of the contract committee co-chairs at GEO. I'm a grad student here and a resident. So I'm glad to see that this resolution is finally before council. It's a product of a lot of work on our behalves, and we're really excited to see it moving forward because it's such a critical piece of legislation. But time is running out, and to a great extent, it has already run out. The new leasing cycle is already upon us. People have already moved out, they're starting to move in, their new leases will go to effect, and this legislation has not yet passed. What does that mean? Another year and more evictions. Because let's be clear, non-renewal is eviction. So I understand that I recently got a call out in an email to City Council by the lovely Area Apartment Association. I'm glad to see that I've got the landlords running scared. But the emails contain some pretty serious errors about what we've been doing in the past and what we're planning to do here with Right to Renew. I urge City Council to look at our corrections on Twitter to this email, which received a failing grade from our GSIs. I think it's also important to point out here that the landlords seem surprised that we hate them, that we're angry at them, that we're frustrated. They act like we're insidiously creating this campaign to villainize them. But the truth is, we're not villainizing them. They villainize themselves by treating their tenants with disrespect, by bullying us, by terrorizing us, by forcing us out of our homes, by evicting people during the pandemic, and by charging exorbitant rents that no one can afford. Their behavior is so atrocious that we have to turn to the government to step in and prevent them from continuing on as they are. So what is Right to Renew about? Well, it's about power. Non-renewal is a threat that hangs over the head of every tenant like a sword. We are scared of being seen as uppity tenants for asking for the repairs that we're legally entitled to, and for not just, smiling and nodding at everything our landlord says. How can we quietly enjoy our residence with that threat hanging over us? Simply, we cannot. So I have to say that even though this resolution is now here, we are still very frustrated. We're frustrated that it's been another year when we identified this problem a year ago, that it's still not ready to go to first reading, even though it's been sitting with the city's lawyers for months and months, since March, I believe, and that City Council itself is not taking the initiative on these issues. It should not be up to activists to be fighting for this. You need to take the initiative and start putting forward these kinds of resolutions yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
What do we want?
Our next speaker,
When do we want it? Now.
our next speaker is Lafiste Gallimore.
When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Right to renew. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Right to renew. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Right to renew.
Mr. Mayor,
When do we
please.
want it?
Our next speaker is Lafiste Gallimore.
Greetings to the mayor, the city council, staff, and my fellow citizens who are present here tonight. I'm here because of my continuing concern regarding the city's issues with hiring black people to work at City Hall. The reporter from MLI did an excellent job of capturing the essence of the issue as it relates to the city's effort to implement a new diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative at City Hall. My question to you, Mayor and City Council, how many more initiatives will it take in order to achieve your goal? Is it really necessary to keep investing taxpayers' money in initiatives where there is no accountability? Mr. Mayor, I quote you, "Workforce discrimination is unacceptable. We know that as an organization, it is an area where improvements is absolutely necessary and is a council priority. Over the last year and a half, this council has demonstrated its commitment to excellence, integrity, and equity," end of quote. I ask you, Mr. Mayor and Council, is settling complaints about paying out taxpayers' money is an indication of the progress you reference in your comments? Quite frankly, Mr. Mayor and Council, I don't see the progress you referred to. However, I do have a suggestion that may help this organization closer to reality. I'm requesting data on the number of hires that took place under the leadership of your former Human Resources Director, who demonstrated blatant racial bias towards blacks during her tenure at City Hall. I would like to know what positions or jobs that was posted during her tenure, who applied to what position by race and gender, what was the outcome in terms of who was hired. I also would like to request data on the hirings that took place under your previous city administrator, where it is well documented that he too exhibited racial bias towards blacks at City Hall. I believe that close scrutiny of this data may provide useful information to the citizens of this community and to the city's poor track record regarding in hiring blacks to work in City Hall. I do hope this information within the next few weeks, and I look forward to helping you and the council to move forward in addressing this sensitive issue. I would like to submit this as my request, my formal request, for the data that I mentioned.
To the clerk, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rowan Price.
Howdy. My name is Rowan Price. I live at 1518 Gilbert Court. I'm a member of Escher Cooperative House, formerly the North Campus Co-ops. I'm here to read a statement that was passed at our House meeting on August 3rd. And here it goes. Escher Cooperative House exists because of the hard work and dedication of thousands of co-opers across decades. The ICC broke ground at Gilbert Court in June of 1969 with funding from the first housing and urban development loan ever given to a cooperative organization. The building was completed in 1971 and, when full, houses 165 members. For more than half of Escher's existence, Chef Lynn has managed our 2 industrial kitchens, kept inventory, and cooked dinner for our members. Hundreds of Escherites have come together over her food to have meetings, solve problems, and build lasting relationships. Entire PhD theses have been fueled by her dedication, and through the turmoil of student life, a housing crisis, and most recently a pandemic, that dinner would always be at Escher has become a welcome constant in our lives. Because most of my members' house labor is served in the kitchen, her patience in training new members to the strange world of an industrial kitchen and commitment to nutrition and food safety have helped keep us safe. And by building infrastructure and systems for her future, she has helped us stay safe for a long time to come. A critical member of Escher's community, Lynn is part of what makes Escher House a home. For these reasons and many more, the members of Escher Cooperative House formally request that the name of Gilbert Court be officially changed to Lynn Court in recognition of her 28 years of dedicated service and to cement her place and ours in cooperative history and in the history of Ann Arbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Griswold.
I'm sure everyone is aware of the hexavalent chromium spill that occurred and threatened the Huron River. It appears that it is not as serious as first thought, but Congresswoman, or I'm sorry, State Representative Yusuf Rabi has asked me to coordinate an effort to get support for his polluter pay bill that has been in the House, and there's a companion bill in the Senate. I'm mentioning it tonight simply for information purposes. I plan to bring it to the August 18th Council Policy Agenda Committee and to the Environmental Commission later this month, and then bring it back on September 6th to Council as a resolution. I want to acknowledge the work that's been completed so far in Oakland County by the chair of the county commission, as well as our water resource commissioner, Evan Pratt, who is now working with Livingston County. The only way we are going to discourage and reduce the number of spills and toxins in our environment is to have a very strong polluter pay law in Michigan, and this will help make that a reality. So the next thing is regarding Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, and that is there is a unity event tomorrow evening that is sponsored by the Congresswoman and the Washtenaw County Democratic Party. If anyone is interested in that, I'm not going to announce the details for security reasons, but simply contact me. You can just Google my name, and my phone number is right there, and I will provide the information for you, and that's also open to interested students, GO members, if they're interested. Lastly, I want to thank staff for hosting a meeting to start looking at optimizing our different initiatives, including Vision Zero and A20.
Councilmember.
We had a productive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Song.
I chatted with Carol Gibson, the founder of Another Ann Arbor, a nonprofit dedicated to the recording and promoting of history of the city's Black residents, about her father, Dr. Lee Jones, who was a Second Ward resident for almost 50 years before he died this last September. Dr. Jones will be honored by the U of M Dental School at the end of this month. They're honoring his life's work counseling people of color and Black dental students by naming a conference room after him. So I'd like to thank Mayor Taylor for issuing a proclamation in appreciation for Dr. Jones' work. The second Black Lives Matter mural will be installed on the 20th at Wheeler Park. I believe we have an early start at 7 a.m. Last time we finished around 1 p.m. So I encourage folks to come out and volunteer. We had folks of all ages and abilities come out to help paint. And lastly, I had some conversations with Washtenaw Housing Alliance in regards to the right to renewal. I think there's some eagerness around around agencies who work in housing to have some input on this ordinance change, particularly since they were the ones who've had to help implement the early lease ordinance in terms of getting information out to landlords and property owners. So my hope is that as we discuss this later on today, we can also consider the work that agencies are putting forth and helping put this together. Thanks.
Further communications. Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Just a quick congratulations to the Greenbelt program. With $26.5 million in funds, they've now been able to secure about $83 million worth of real estate and getting close to now almost 7,000 acres of protected land. And we have a lot of conversations about conserving land within the city, but it's also important to recognize, I think, what good we're doing protecting land both for recreation and so that we'll have a safe source for food and protecting our water, many decades into the future. So just want to congratulate Remy Long for just some outstanding work. We actually haven't been able to meet with the Greenbelt because staff has been so busy closing on projects that are in the pipeline. So thanks for that.
Further communication. I'd like to request confirmation for the following appointment that was presented to City Council on the August 4, 2022 regular session meeting to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors, Simi Barr. May I have a motion, please? Moved by Councilmember Briggs, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion, please. All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. We now come to the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Song. Discussion, please, of the consent agenda. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. Can I pull CA1, CA8, and CA9?
CA1, CA8, CA9. For the discussion of the consent agenda, Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. For brief discussion, I'd also like to pull CA 10, 14, and 18. And I'd like to comment, I won't pull it off for discussion, but I'd like to comment on CA 4, and I'll send a follow-up email, just that I asked the administrator. CA 4 is a resolution to approve a contract to redo the city's website, and if you have received correspondence like I do, you've heard from people that it really doesn't work for them. One thing that I always do when I use the website myself is I provide feedback on the bottom of the page. It says, was this page helpful, yes or no, and tell us why. And I always fill those out, but I don't know what IT hole they fall into. And so I'd like our administrator to gather up those, however many years of feedback exist from that form, and make sure that the new provider has access to that. And I would also be interested to see it myself, just from an oversight perspective. Again, on the bottom of each page, we ask, was this page helpful, yes or no? And then there's a room to comment. And I'm sure that in our educated community, many people have told us what would improve their website. And I think that should be the basis of this redesign.
Further discussion of the consent agenda. All in favor of the consent agenda, with the exception of CA1, 8, 9, 10, 14, 18, please say aye. Opposed? The consent agenda, with the exception of CA1, 8, 9, 10, 14, 18, is approved with 11 council members present, all vote in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA13, CA15, CA16. CA1, resolution to close streets for the mayor's autumnal green fair, Friday, October 7, 2022, moved by Councilmember Ramlawi, seconded by Councilmember Rodina. Discussion, please, of CA1. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. Just real quickly, I guess I could have just commented on it, but it's good to see that the library lot and the library lane are being included for this event. I think that space is desperately needing activities like this, and so it's good to see this fair expanding, educating the community on the evolutionary ways we are trying to advance our 820 goals. Hopefully the weather is nice that day, and I'm glad it's not a home game, so look forward to seeing the success coming from that day there on that site.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. CA8, resolution to approve a professional services agreement with Ecology Center, Inc. for resource recovery, education, outreach, engagement, marketing for $853,211 over 5 years. Moved by Councilmember Ramlawi, seconded by Councilmember Rodina. Discussion, please, of CA8. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. And I apologize for not getting this question in sooner. I was wondering if staff was here or members from the Ecology Center that can speak on this here. Lengthy 5-year contract of $850,000. It jumps out at me. It's quite substantial, and as I alluded to in my earlier comments, as we move forward with implementing new ways, trying to get to carbon neutrality or something close to that, I understand the need to spend and educate. I notice in this 5-year contract, the second and third year, there's a spike of nearly $250,000 a year in each of those years. And so just to illuminate the public and perhaps this board and myself in particular, what's being planned and what kind of goals and metrics are we going to have in order to measure the success?
I'm going to turn this over to Sarah Mason. For those of you that haven't met Sarah, she's our resource recovery manager and has been working closely with the Ecology Center to develop the scope of this. I will say before she gets started that when you look at the recommendations in the solid waste resource management plan.
Excuse me, Mayor. I can't.
Ms. Majewski, hold on, please. Councilmember?
I can't decipher the answer.
I think that was an intro to the answer, but Ms. Majewski, could you please perhaps speak closer to the microphone?
Sure, can you hear me better now?
I think that's better, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying that I'm going to turn this over to Sarah Mason, our resource recovery manager. She's going to answer your questions, Councilmember Romali. But as an introduction, just so you know, the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan had a recommendation for expanded education and outreach. And this contract will fulfill all of those recommendations in there. And I will let Sarah expand on that.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Molly. So this contract covers 5 different work areas that do meet the recommendations of the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan, including the biggest expenditure is around a marketing campaign for education on trash, recycling, compost, and the circular economy. That was a direct recommendation of the plan. And it also will do the social-based marketing. There will be outreach to multifamily properties, outreach to commercial properties and the business units. There will be youth education, and then continued outreach. Another recommendation in the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan was grassroots education, meeting the public where they are at events, and this contract will also include that. The cost does vary over each year of the contract because there's different work to be done in each of those work areas. Some of them require development and programming and planning, and then there's an implementation cost. So the cost around, say, for the social-based marketing campaign, the development of that happens really within the first year of the contract, and then will be rolled out in the years after that.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councilmember Dish.
I just want to say how excited I am to see this contract. It brings into focus the crucial synergies between A20 and solid waste. This 5-year contract is no longer than usual, but it is more far-reaching than previous contracts because it undertakes a much more ambitious public education campaign that is aligned with our A20 goals, especially Strategy 5, which calls for things that we urgently need. And I'm just going to list a few of them because they've been on my wish list forever. And one, and I think many of us, not just mine, but one is increasing the recycling rate in the commercial sector. Second is boosting all of our material resource literacy by teaching everybody appropriate handling of recyclable, compostable, and trash materials, but not only making us more literate about material resources, but then taking us to a new level, where we're not only better at the disposal end of things, but we explore strategies that extend the useful life of a good. So swapping, refurbishing, repurposing, all of those incredible things which are part of what we call the circular economy. I'm also really excited to see the new partnership with CAN, with the Community Action Network, which will be working with 4 lower-income multifamily properties in the city to help the residents identify what their priorities are for solid waste issues and to help work out some of the really knotty problems of making recycling work in multifamily properties.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to note that the Ecology Center has been essentially the sole supplier of the service for as long as I can remember. And so we got, $850,000 worth of marketing and education and so on. And at the end of each of the previous 5 years contracts, I don't recall ever seeing a summary that shows even an estimation of the good that came from all this. If that exists, I missed it in this resolution. So I would urge the vendor who receives this contract, who is poised to receive this contract, to set some goals and then study at the end to see if those goals were indeed met. Otherwise, it's just, I guess, the cost of doing business with recycling. When you go out to the reuse center right now and you try and drop off things, you may be shocked to see the signs of all the things that we don't accept anymore that I'm sure people think we still accept, and I'm sure are going into that waste stream. And I mean, if you see what happens to a good deal of our recycling, be it glass for landfill cover or refusal to take plastics or scrap metals or things like that, you see that we're really tightening up the amount of recycling that we do as a community. And I don't know if part of that education is headed towards this or not. But, I'd like to see some quantification of the money that we spend at this table. That's all I'd like to say about that. I just would like to see something quantifiable, a little less politicking and a little more action.
Further discussion? Councilmember Song.
The contract was part of our packet. So if you look at page 11, there are primary goals included for every sector that our staff is looking to work in. Councilmember Dish had mentioned the increase in recycling rate in the commercial sector, move towards a more circular economy, reducing waste generated, raising community awareness. But the contract goes on, it's 35 pages long. It goes into quite a lot of detail on events, on pilot work with businesses, to engaging youth, community-based social marketing. I don't think it's really, it's very, very specific on how this contract is outlaying deliverables, on how the pilot programs are being set up, who's being engaged, the execution, the implementation. So I encourage folks who have questions about what exactly we're doing with public monies to review it. It's pretty detailed. Thanks.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. It's evident what they're going to do. What I'm asking for is an assessment of the outcomes. I see what they're going to do. I read the contract just like you say you did, so I see what they're up to. What I want to know is, at the end, I would like even a brief report of successes and or failures.
Further discussion? Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. We've seen contracts before with the Ecology Center, obviously, and I'll leave it at that. I will say the reality is it's in disarray in terms of what the public understands and what's actually being done. And so we really need to get better at this. It's unfortunately been it's been an abject failure, and it's no one's particular fault. I'm not here to point fingers at why recycling. There's many different reasons, but there is a lot of misunderstanding as to materials that are accepted and et cetera, and many of these same initiatives were initiatives that were in previous contracts as well. So I know there's a couple new aspects, but much of it is what we've been doing in the past. And I just think, as I said in my previous comment, some metrics on this would be advisable. Thank you.
Councilmember Dish.
Question for staff. We assess how clean our recycling, for one thing, is. how effectively Ann Arborites recycle. What is our, I just can't remember the thing that's called, the rate. And I just wanted to know what was our rate and how does it compare to peer communities nationally?
Sarah, you just completed the audit. Would you like to give the most recent? I know what we had before was very low, and we're some of the lowest contamination rates in the state, and we can rival, our best performing benchmark communities across the country. But we did just complete an audit. Sarah has those results handy.
Yes. Off the top of my head, so our goal is to be less than 12%, and we did our audit in April, which was our first compositional audit at the new MRF once it opened, and we do those twice annually, and it was a little bit higher than our goal. I want to say that it was between 13 and 14%. I can pull up the exact number. But we are working to bring that down, and this education and this outreach will help towards that end.
Do you have any understanding of how that compares nationally to, yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of the second part of your question. Ann Arbor is a leader and has been a leader in recycling. And even though that's slightly above our own ambitious goal, it is excellent when you compare it to programs across the country. I think that the average contamination rate for most single stream curbside programs ranges closer 18 to 25%, some higher than that, some as high as 40%. So we really do a very good job compared to.
Further discussion? Councilor Brisson.
So I'm seeing here in the contract that within 12 weeks, the contractor shall schedule and perform a follow-up interview survey with business leadership using post-consultation worksheet. And that on pages 28 and on, it goes through the methodology of each effort, including surveys, visually checking how solid waste containers are used, estimating the proportion of recycling, identifying and noting significant types of contamination, and on. How is this something that if the contractor does not follow these commitments on the calendar that they've provided, including assessments and feedback and survey results, do you renegotiate with the contractor or create another form of evaluation process?
We have built in negotiation with the Ecology Center, a regular schedule of meetings between staff and the Ecology Center. So we will be able to address if there's any issues with their performing the work as outlined in the contract, through those meetings. The intention is to have regular communication about the work that's being performed.
Thank you.
Further discussion? For my part, I'm delighted that this contract is moving forward. The Ecology Center is, of course, a local organization that does and has, for years now, done outstanding work in our community. With particularity in this context with respect to recycling education. Recycling education is, of course, an imperative because we have new residents coming in all the time. And further, the recycle marketplace changes all the time. And so it's incredibly important that we have this ongoing education effort necessitated by a changing population and changing market exigencies. I am entirely confident in the good work done by the Ecology Center and look forward to Ann Arbor continuing its recycling excellence. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with.
Roll call starts with Councilmember Briggs.
Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Briggs.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Romali?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Grant?
Yes.
Councilmember Regina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion Motion carries.
CA9, resolution to approve a contract with Margolis Companies, Inc. for the purchase, delivery, and planting of trees along street rights-of-way in the amount of $474,075. Moved by Councilmember Umlawi, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion, please, of CA9. Councilmember Umlawi.
Thank you. This is another kind of policy issue with our tree planting. They're just, I don't know if there's been recent adopted changes in our policies. I know we ask for some things from the contractor when they plant these trees. But obviously has been even news articles written about this in MLive from residents who have gone around and surveyed these trees and after they've been planted and seen the mortality rate on these being higher than we had hoped or should because of the lack of watering. There's just obviously extreme benefits to the longevity and health of those trees to have very frequent watering and beyond the first year perhaps, and not just that first growing season, but for maybe 2 years or so. And so we're planting a lot of trees, but unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of success in the past. And I just hope as we go forward in this program of replanting trees, is that we invest in the programs to intensively water these trees so that we get a much better outcome than. And so my question, I guess, has any in the last year or so changes in our policy when it comes to these seedlings and these plantings?
Right now, we are working on our urban forest management plan update. And as part of that, we're evaluating all of our tree planting practices and our maintenance practices. We have been talking, internally about watering, post-watering, understanding that it's difficult to rely on residents for that activity. So we are hoping that the urban forest management plan will provide recommendations on watering. We're looking at either 2 years or 3 years post-planting. The current contract for planting automatically comes with 1 year. So when we talk about what we plan to do in the future, we're looking at adding another year or two to that watering to guarantee a higher success rate of our trees. And we are planning for that right now to take to into our next budget cycle.
Thank you so much, Molly. That's great to hear.
Councilmember Dish.
I wanted to note that I think we all, as Councilmember Rumlawi has just reminded us, we all remember the MLive story, and I think it did raise concerns. And staff on the agenda response memo, staff did let us know that they are still examining the survey to see what their opinion of it is. But they made an important observation for us, which is that the person who did that survey, which was in Ward 5, included trees categorized in fair condition in what they claimed was the 62% of not thriving. And that's probably not a correct thing to do. The staff response says that most trees in urban forests fall into the fair condition rating, and they are thriving. So what does fair mean? It applies to trees with minor structural problems and/or mechanical damage, significant damage from non-fatal or disfiguring diseases, and maybe they're flourishing less well than adjacent trees, so they may not be as large, but they are not dying. So so I think that the methodology of the survey is not quite what we would ask for and may have over-exaggerated the failure rate of these trees.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, thanks. And since this is out here to be talked about, just a couple comments for public knowledge. Of these 1,000 trees 370 are considered small trees that will never get any bigger than 20 to 25 feet, 15 to 25 feet. 275 of them are medium trees, which, depending on the species, could go up to 30 feet. And then 355, the remainder, the final third, are what are considered large trees. So 65% of these are small or medium trees. And I don't know what we're getting. I mean, I used to work at a nursery, but we were a retail nursery, so I don't know how these prices stand up. When you look at it, it's about $500 a tree. And I don't know if we're planting like a 1-inch caliber tree, like when we talk about a small tree like a crabapple or something, a 1-inch caliber tree is $150 or whatever retail, and a 2-inch is maybe $300 retail. Hopefully with orders of up to 1,000 units, we're not paying retail for these things. And much of the cost is the planting and the follow-up maintenance. The one thing that sticks out for me about this is that, as folks may or may not be aware, that most of our forestry, in fact, I think it's all of our forestry, and definitely this tree planting, is coming from our stormwater fees. So all the more reason to be, that I hope that staff will continue to do a thorough following up on this vendor. I think this was actually the only person, I don't know if I read that right, if it was the only vendor who replied to the bid. I'm not sure I read that right, but because there's a bid tab, so there must be more than one. Anyway, it's a lot of money. We spend a lot of money on trees, and they're not all going to be mighty oaks someday. I assume that some of that is determined by their actual placement, like we wouldn't be wanting to put oaks underneath existing power lines and then subject them to the brutalizing that DTE does when they trim their right-of-ways. So that's all, just a few comments. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, I appreciate that staff is, taking a look at our policies and with regards to the urban forest management plan. I do think that the survey that was, this was a great COVID project of a Fifth Ward resident who went around and visited all of the trees that were planted in the Fifth Ward and used the survey methodology that he found existing within our plans, and then provided us with the data about what he found afterwards, because he was a little bit concerned about that, the results of that, and provided some recommendations that I think it's important. I think he's sitting now on the Urban Forest Management Plan Committee and is part of that process, so that's a great inclusion into the city process. But I think one of the recommendations that came out of that was to consider a volunteer management program that would allow for residents to care for trees that were planted along their block. And I'm hoping that we'll see some of these recommendations seriously considered and included. I think we all want to see these trees thrive, and we've had some challenges, and we need to acknowledge that our program there are areas for improvement here. So I'm looking forward to see what comes out of this, but I'm hoping that we can see improvements year after year.
Further discussion? I was excited to be part of the council that would participate in the development of the urban forestry management plan, and then the ultimate fully funding of the urban forestry management plan. And I'm excited again that we continue to fund it. We continue to plant our street trees, and along the way, prune our street trees. Our street trees are an incredibly important part of the Ann Arbor community. They bring stormwater benefits, of course, first and foremost in this context, but also obviously shading, quality of life, temperature, air quality, and just general neighborhood happiness to so many folks throughout our city. I'm excited that we're moving forward on this and look forward to the continued iterative work of staff, colleagues, and resident volunteers so that our urban forestry management plan can ever improve. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. CA10, resolution to approve a construction contract to Salster Construction, Inc. for the street preventative maintenance project fiscal year 2023, RFP number 2237, in the amount of $4,577,354.95. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion, please, of CA10. Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. I'm just wanting to pull this out because I'm not going to vote for this because I don't believe that our RFP processes are a best practice. And furthermore, I don't think they're a fair practice. And I think the residents should be aware that 40% of the decision that is made on who to provide this contract to is based on somewhat tangible and somewhat intangible calculations, 20% workforce development. So we're paying private entities to develop their workforce, essentially, and 20% social equity and sustainability, as such as that is defined. And so I just wanted to pull this out because while I support the need to do the work, I do not support the method by which we are choosing vendors for this type of work.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Briggs.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Romali?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
CA 14, resolution to approve a construction contract with PK Constructing LLC for pavement marking maintenance and A2 Vision Zero Quick Build Project fiscal year 2023 in the amount of $698,808.92. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion of CA 14, Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. So we have before us approximately $700,000 of pavement marking, and it's combined to pavement marking maintenance and A2 Vision Zero Quick Build project. And I tried to do my own calculating, looking at the bidders' calculations as to what percentage was what, because they weren't separated. The discussion was separated, but the best I could come up with was at least a third of this was going towards the Vision Zero project, and maybe even more. And that was just based on green paint, sharrows, bike marks, and the tan paint at these intersections, which is a new approach. I just looking at the the various planned views of this project. So I was just wondering if we had a sense of how much of this was typical pavement maintenance that we see PK doing around our community, and how much of this was this Vision Zero Quick Build. If anybody knows.
Mr. Hutchinson?
I'm going to turn this over to Raymond Hess, our transportation manager, to respond to.
Yes, good evening, Council. Raymond Hess, transportation manager for the city. I don't know if I can speak to the proportion of the contract per se in terms of how much of this goes to the standard preventive maintenance of pavement or pavement markings and things of that nature, but I can just speak briefly to the quick build, which is, with the adoption of the transportation plan that occurred last year, there's an emphasis on these sort of interim improvements that we call quick build, which in lieu of waiting for an intersection to be rebuilt, we can go out with paint and posts and quickly make changes to an intersection at a lower capital cost than rebuilding that entire construction, or rebuilding that entire intersection. In terms of the rest of the payment marking contract, I know there are other members in the engineering department that help manage that, and it's largely preventive maintenance in nature, as I understand it, where they go in and they look at kind of the quality of pavement markings, whether it be crosswalks, the long lines between lanes, bike lanes, so forth and so on, and all of that is kind of a routine cycle. So I know that didn't specifically address the kind of division between how much is in the routine maintenance versus what's quick build. We added the quick build to this just because we tried to get some economies of scale by piggybacking off of an existing contract.
If I could add real quickly there, in the revenue breakdown in the memo, there's a line for American Rescue Plan Act ARPA funding for approximately $292,000. That is the quick build portion of the contract right there.
Councilmember Grand.
I think Mr. Hutchinson actually answered the question, but on the page in our packet, it does break down $445,000 for maintenance of existing pavement markings and the remainder for the quick build. So it's, I think, right there. And I'll just take a second to just express my enthusiasm for this project there. This is the direction we want to be going in. That's, relatively inexpensive, and we get a lot of safety for a fairly small investment. So I just want to thank transportation staff for moving forward with this and finding a way to get some economies of scale in the process.
Councilmember Griswold.
Unfortunately, I will not be supporting this. I feel like the term Vision Zero has been bastardized by the city of Ann Arbor. Vision Zero is a very rigorous process that includes evaluation. It includes looking at crash data and trying to prevent crashes. In July, we had 2 injury crashes, pedestrians who were injured. I love green paint as much as the next person, but why aren't we evaluating the infrastructure that's been built? And I'll just give you 2 examples. One is we've got vegetation all over this city, and we are not trimming it to improve sight distance, and crashes are happening. Number 2, the median between Community High School and Carytown, I sent an email today, the median, no one is responsible for it. Vegetation is now 4 feet tall. A person in a wheelchair is not visible when they're in the crosswalk at that median. So until we seriously evaluate our existing infrastructure and start taking action to reduce the number of crashes, I just can't support it. I'm very troubled. Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner.
Hey, that's a good point, Councilwoman Griswold. I've got dozens of photos of foliage obscuring sight lines, hanging over directional arrows, speed limit signs, and so on all over the community. So I don't know what we can do to pick that trimming up. I mean, I've taken a couple upon myself just because I carry pruners in my truck. I don't know there's 3 folks on the screen here. If somebody would like to answer the statement that was put forward. Are we getting a lot of safety for this money? And how do we know?
Yes, if I may. This is driven by data. We do have a consultant that's helping us with this. Sam Schwartz is the same consultant that helped us write the plan. It is data driven. So all the locations that are included in the quick build are on our tier 1 or tier 2 safety intersections and or corridors. And all of the countermeasures that are being applied are appropriate countermeasures looking at the traffic crash pattern. We have been vetting these with the Vision Zero Implementation Committee. So there's a community steering committee that's helping vet these ideas, reviewing the plans with us, and we've been giving regular updates to the Transportation Commission. So yes, I think it's very much Vision Zero focused. It's very much focused on data-driven approaches as well as countermeasures that are meant to address the underlying causes.
Councilmember Briggs.
I think Mr. Hess answered the question that I was going to ask. Thank you to Councilmember Hayner for proposing that. I think it's pretty clear that we went through a pretty rigorous process in our community to develop a comprehensive transportation plan. Part of that process was really evaluating the source of, it was driven by the concept of Vision Zero and identifying where crashes are existing in our community, identifying appropriate countermeasures. And we have a pretty detailed plan to look at if we have questions about whether or not we are having a data-driven approach to this. Strategy 3 of that plan in the short term was to develop a quick build implementation improvement program, which we unanimously adopted this plan. And so Mr. Hess talked about the process that we've used following that with the Vision Zero Implementation Subcommittee, bringing in Sam Schwartz to continue helping with this process to make sure we're using, developing these, implementing these tools appropriately in our own community, and then bringing them through Transportation Commission and now to Council. So I'm pretty proud of where our community is headed and excited about the process that we're using.
Councilmember Griswold.
Yes, I mean no disrespect for staff. This council sets policies, and they have set policies that say ignore the vegetation. We move from one shiny new project to another, and we never evaluate. We go through this data-driven process, but it's very superficial. There is no excuse for why we have 4 feet of vegetation in a median on a one-way street. In fact, there's a question about why we even have that median. And no one is responsible for it. The ticket has been in for over a week, and who is responsible for that? A true Vision Zero community would be addressing all of these dangers in our community, and instead we just go to the next new project. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Umlawi.
Thanks. Seems like a lively discussion on more policy issue. Appreciate staff being here to answer questions. You know, it's one of these things that it'll be an ongoing debate. We still, after many years, hear discussion as to why one road gets fixed ahead of another one, and et cetera. And when we look at these improvements, you know, I see some are done in some, you know, areas that I think are warranted, and then I look at some others and I think, well, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to be investing in some of these other ones when we have so many other issues, you know. And the problem that I had with these quick build is that we have so much other infrastructure that's failing or falling apart, and we're putting in and spending money on temporary measures that are fleeting, and I don't like doing that. You know, on a personal level, I'd rather see us invest our money wisely and get a good return on that. And I understand some of this was free money. We're playing with house money now, and so let it. You know, I'm not going to get in the way of that. You know, I just noticed, you know, especially in the downtown area with the new protected bike lanes, that green paint lasts about 6 months. We're spending an awful lot of money on some maintenance, while other areas don't get the attention because of funding. So, you know, as I'm on my way out, but I continue to stress the importance in investing in infrastructure that will be there for a generation or two, and not for a season or two. And so I'll end it with this question: how long is that green paint supposed to last? I mean, because it doesn't seem to last as long as any other marking that we put down on pavement.
Councilmember, I might have to get back to you. We have someone on our staff who helps manage the specifics of the green paint, and it probably has a better idea of how long that lasts. But I can't give a specific answer in terms of what our experience has been in terms of how long that lasts. I don't know if Nick or Dave have other impressions on that.
Yeah, one thing, I don't know the specific answer to that either. I know the final treatment should last a lot longer than 6 months. What may be seen in some places around the downtown is where a temporary paint was put down near the end of the season when the weather was not adequate to put down the permanent pavement markings. So that could be what you're seeing in the downtown area.
I'll wait.
Councilmember Briggs.
I just wanted to give Mr. Hess or Mr. Hutchinson an opportunity to talk about the utility of quick build projects. Obviously, we would love to have the money to permanently build out many of these pieces, but I do want to give you the opportunity to discuss that this is more than just paint on the ground. Not that, though that I do find utility in that, but to discuss a little bit why we're using quick build projects.
Yeah, I can take first stab at it. You know, first of all, I think if we look at, you know, the capital improvement plan, just look at how long it takes for a major capital project to kind of go through the process of, you know, design, possibly right-of-way acquisition, you know, engagement, all those steps. It takes years. You know, the projects that are up for reconstruction, rebuild, or resurfacing are projects that have been, you know, in the pipeline for years. acknowledging that a major rebuild, waiting that time before we address a known safety concern becomes problematic. And so the idea of quick build is to go out, use materials that are readily available, such as paint, such as delineators, flexible delineators, what we'll call posts. So we call them paint and post projects oftentimes, where we can create a buffer, we can create, the sort of traffic calming sort of effect that we're looking for. We can improve the environment for pedestrians, cyclists, transit users, and motorists as well with these paint and post type projects. And they are not necessarily meant to be interim per se, they're just meant to utilize materials that are readily available. Then we evaluate their effectiveness and how well they're doing, and then we program them for a major capital project as budgets allow for. So it's a way to start making kind of incremental and fast changes to the built environment to help achieve those Vision Zero outcomes that we hope to achieve.
Further discussion, Councilmember Song.
I'm reflecting back to when staff had worked on, or had considered the Earhart Glacier possibilities with a quick build and paint to reduce crashes on Earhart and Glacier. So is that a good example of what we're looking at when I believe a previous council had voted against, I think it was about an $80K improvement to reduce crashes by 50% at the intersection. In these quick builds, we are looking at safety as a primary consideration, correct?
That is correct. And using Earhart as an example, the idea was a couple years ago when we brought that idea forward, that would be a sort of interim treatment. So it would be paint and post proposed treatment. And then when the capital project was going to come through, which I believe is a 2024 project, or 2023 project, then that would make those changes permanent. And so now we're up against the permanent project. Now we may not have enough budget to do full scale, concrete work, but still incorporating a lot of those same safety concepts. We're working on public engagement right now on that project so that we can tee that up for construction next year.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Briggs.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Romlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
No.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
CA 18, resolution to approve the letter of understanding between the city and the Downtown Development Authority of Ann Arbor, DDA, to cancel the joint work session required by the parking agreement between the city and the DDA dated July 1, 2011, as amended. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion, please, of CA 18. Councilmember Hayner.
Well, thank you. The parking agreement we have with the DDA comes with a joint working session requirement, in my mind, because we grant the Downtown Development Authority the responsibility and opportunity to make a lot of money managing our parking structures. And this joint working session is one of the public ways that we can have conversations with the grantee of this opportunity. And I'm not willing to have my voice affected by proxy. And I don't think the rest of you should either. These joint working session opportunities are few and far between. We couldn't get the university regents to have one. Here's one that we have by contract. Don't renege on our responsibilities to oversee the DDA. I'm going to vote no to this.
Further discussion? Councilmember Romlawi.
Thank you, and appreciate you pulling this off. This should be alarming to the community. We have a new head of the DDA. We haven't worked with much at all. We're coming out of COVID. The most affected part of the city was, by a large measure, the DDA, the future of parking, the future of cars, the right-of-way issues that we're having, the right-of-way issues we're dealing with. Again, the new leadership after 20 years of Susan Paulet being there. Not to have something that is been customary and tradition for well over about a dozen years by this resolution seems wrong. Doesn't seem like we're doing what we were elected to do. What we get paid $1,500 a month to do, and that is to be fully engaged. And to cancel a work session that you only have one time a year. And we've gutted so much of what council was doing, and now we're doing very little in terms of work sessions and public engagement when it comes to setting policy. And here we have one here where I think this is huge not to have this meeting. This is not like 2020 or 2021. There are a lot of changes, and I'm sure that they're going to happen, but are they going to happen in the public sphere? Are they going to happen with the involvement of the elected body, or some other way? I can't support this, and I urge my colleagues not to support this. This is too important to pass up.
Councilmember Briggs.
Well, I don't feel quite so alarmist about this, but I do think that this is an important touch point that we have between the DDA once a year. I think it is helpful, especially since we do have a new DDA director, to have this meeting this year. And I think it's helpful to have it every year for us to have a strong understanding of what the DDA is doing. I think this is an important entity, and I support continuing this.
For my part, I'm going to be supporting the resolution. I think we have a number of different data points, about 10, 11 data points of work sessions in the past that have, I think, demonstrably been of limited utility. Certainly, it's important that the DDA draft policy in the open, and indeed they do. It's important that the city have engagement with the DDA, and indeed we do, in no small measure than in light of the administrator himself serving on the DDA board. The bottom line is that there can also be a fair bit of communication that comes to us from the DDA, that comes to the public as a whole from the DDA through webinars, much like we've been doing of late with our most recent budget session. This way, the data from the DDA, if communication and education is necessary and useful, can be here for everyone at all times without the need for the meeting that has not been, in my view, one where there has been particularly effective conversation between DDA members and council members. And so, in my view, that we are making the process more efficient, not losing DDA city engagement, and we also do not inhibit DDA's communication to council or the public about matters of importance to both. Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. This was something that came up at the Council Administration Committee with Mr. Mahoney sitting on the DDA. I think there were also some logistical concerns about getting both boards into a room that could be televised. I won't speak to anyone else on this body. I'll just speak to my own impending relevance that, come a meeting in October right before a major turnover of the council, I believe was also a consideration with, with so many new members of council coming on in November, that there was just for, it doesn't mean that we give it up every year, but for this particular year, it made sense to put a pause till we could, work out the logistics of getting everyone again in the room. I've sat through many of these meetings. Some have been more productive than others, but I was comfortable with Mr. Dohoney's representation on that board, having that liaison take care of things. Also, there's nothing that precludes any council member from speaking to members of the DDA and having conversations with them. So if there's a particular area of interest, I'd encourage you to just reach out to DDA leadership directly.
Councilmember Griswold.
Yes, I want to take this opportunity to welcome Jeffrey Watson. I personally met him at a listening session last week, and I also want to thank him for pointing out some of his concerns with pedestrian safety in the DDA area. So welcome, and thank you for your perspective.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. I plan to oppose this resolution on principle because for a lot of the reasons that Councilmember Romlawi mentioned. I do appreciate the clarification that the timing of this particular meeting will include a lot of members who are effectively not moving forward and relevant to decisions moving forward. But I do appreciate the comment that not having a meeting like this does not prevent communication between individual members of council and individual members of the DDA. I appreciate that as a pattern moving forward, and people need to speak up about a pattern of communication that is outside of public view. To the extent that canceling this meeting is consistent with an ongoing pattern of reducing public engagement, reducing opportunities for public meetings, and these kinds of conversations in public view, I plan to oppose it. Thank you.
Further discussion. Councilmember Song.
Councilmember Romlawi and I are both liaisons on the DDA, to the DDA, and I, for one, have not missed meetings. My apologies if I have not reported out the work, but the DDA has been essential to pre-entitlement to a number of our projects when it comes to our affordable housing goals, bike improvement lanes on East William, curbless streets on State. The DDA is an essential partner. There's no secret to what they do. It's covered by press. The DDA meetings are public. We do have folks who come in and give public comments. I, for one, welcome Mr. Dohoney's leadership on this, and I trust that Mr. Dohoney will bring whatever information that would have been presented to us as a whole to us directly without having to attend yet another meeting. So I think if I'm understanding this right, perhaps Mr. Watson can explain to us what kind of efficiencies he's hoping to achieve in canceling this meeting.
Councilmember Heener.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I wonder if I should let Mr. Watson speak first. It's up to you, of course, but I saw his hand go up earlier.
Oh, I didn't see.
I'll just sum up and say that, comparing this process to making this process analogous with our budget process is even more of a red flag, because I felt, and I know a lot of residents felt, that we had the least transparent, least affording of public opportunity to question our spending decisions, budget process that we've seen in years. To focus, this is not about the DDA generally. This joint working session is required by the parking agreement. This is about parking. And we have before us tonight the removal of parking standards where there will be zero requirements for parking in new construction. Now, surely there's almost 1 million square foot of developable space in the D1, D2, DDA district. And if none of that has parking, based on what's coming up on our agenda, perhaps it's important that we have a conversation with the DDA about the value and the repurposing of our downtown parking structures, perhaps, and what their function will be moving forward as buildings are not required to have parking in downtown, the trade-offs of parking versus residential construction, and so on and so on. And I'm serving until whenever our last day is here, and so I'm sure that my constituents would feel that my opinion is welcome, be it in October or the last meeting of November. And so, again, I'm not going to support this. It's required by our parking agreement, and there's no reason to waive that requirement, and no reason whatsoever. And I can assure you that the person who's going to sit in my chair doesn't have the opinion of the dozens of downtown business owners in Ward 1 that talk to me all the time that ask me to take parking issues to the DDA at this session.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I just, since some conspiracies have been thrown out again in the face of just, simple disagreement, I was wondering if Mr. Mahoney could speak to the logistical issues that we spoke of in terms of the challenges of getting these two groups together.
As indicated, we had stopped having work sessions this year. This particular item refers to simply canceling the meeting this year, not in perpetuity, not next year. Part of the timing of it, the DDA is going to be involved in going through a number of studies looking at downtown parking. We won't be doing that in calendar year 2022. We won't be at a point to even know what we're talking about until calendar year 23. So it didn't seem logistically or efficiently appropriate to have a meeting when we're not at the point of actually dealing with the parking issue. It's something that's been discussed within the DDA board. As indicated, Mr. Watson is been getting settled into the new role, settled into the community, and it's taking a bit of time for us to gear up to be able to look at those issues. The commitment around transparency has not been impacted at all. As indicated, our meetings are public, and when we get more substance around the parking issue, we certainly intend to engage with city council members. At the time that we were making the decision, at that point in time, we were still in the throes of trying to manage through COVID and trying to figure out how to have the DDA board in here with you all at the same time. Did not seem to be a workable scenario at that point. So we made the recommendation to do what's in front of you tonight.
Further discussion? Councilmember Ramlawi.
Well, I appreciate people being as honest as I can most often get. It's scary, for me at least. What I heard the mayor say effectively was these meetings were pointless, not just this year, but all years. And then I heard someone else say, well, there's going to be turnover, so what's the point? I mean, there's always been turnover, and we still had this. There used to be elections every year, so there used to be turnover annually. The fact that we're not meeting because there's studies underway, there's always studies underway. This is a touch point. This is a serious touch point once a year. We are the policy setters, the council, the board of direction, not the city administrator. I'm glad the city administrator has a seat and he has a great working relationship. But as policy setters, we are the ones that set policy. I'm just flabbergasted about the ease that people have to adjudicate their responsibilities. So, I know where this is going, but I'm highly disappointed but been enlightened by the conversation, because this doesn't have anything to do with a lot of things. This has a lot to do with something. I'll leave it at that.
Councilmember Song.
I don't believe anyone's abdicating from their duties. So I guess, Mr. Dohoney, can you reiterate again how the information will be received by council regardless? How this information will still be received by council, even as should this meeting be canceled?
The relevancy of canceling this particular meeting also has to do with the time that it was set to occur. We will not be in a position to address the parking issue at that point in time. We won't be able to do that until calendar year 23. So when we looked at the substance of what the meeting would be, when we looked at the logistical issues around the COVID considerations at the time that we made the recommendation, it seemed like not having the meeting for this year only made sense. The DDA's business is all done in the open. Nothing has changed in that regard. There are public comments at those meetings. Minutes are put out. And when we have something of substance, I will be reporting to council. If, you know, we work at the pleasure of the body, so we'll do as directed. But we wouldn't be prepared to have the parking discussion at the normal time that you would be doing the annual meeting.
I appreciate that. And then also, if I can note that the letter, that this request is coming as a joint, via a letter that was included in our council packet on behalf of the city and the DDA from Mr. Dohoney and from Mr. Watson. This was not a request from city council members.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Briggs.
Councilmember Briggs?
No.
Councilmember Romlawi?
No.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Grant?
Yes.
Councilmember Redina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
No.
Motion carries.
We now come to a set of public hearings. Public hearings are opportunities for members of the public to speak to council and the community about the specific subject matter of the public hearing. Folks need not have signed up in advance, but your speech must relate to the specific subject matter of the public hearing, that is to say, the specific item on the agenda. Speakers at public hearings, whether in-house or online, have 3 minutes in which to speak. So in both instances, please pay close attention to the time. Online, our clerk will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time is expired. In the room, the clock on the dais will notify you of same. In each case, when your time is expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Public hearing number 1, an ordinance to amend sections 5.16.3.g, 5.20.10, and 5.30.1 of Chapter 55, Unified Development Code of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, marijuana licenses, trees in the right-of-way, landscape modifications. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Is there anyone online who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Caller with the phone number ending in 147. Press *6 to unmute your phone. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jeff Benko, 213 West Madison, 5th Ward. I wish I could speak with you in person tonight, but family obligations prevent that. But I'm very concerned about the proposed ordinance to remove restrictions on marijuana businesses lots at the expense of the neighboring communities. The most important reason that this ordinance needs to be voted down is that it marks a change in land use policy that greatly increases the scope and the magnitude of the original permit granted without the voice of the neighboring residents going into this amendment. For the 28 dispensaries in Ann Arbor, all of them only went through the medical marijuana permit process. The only ability for the neighboring area to voice any objections to this facility was through the special exemption use process. Objections were limited to making a case against one and only one pharmacy being allowed to move into a lot. Now the amendment would open the door for multiple recreation facilities with the very likely scenario that a recreational dispensary and a consumable facility being on these sites. This is a very different reality from the intent of the original permit of one pharmacy. And to further raise the importance of this point, it should be noted that some of these sites are immediately adjacent to or less than 100 feet away from residential properties. You have to ask, what are Ann Arbor's values? The state values were to keep recreational sales out of the local communities that did not want them and to protect children with a 1,000-foot barrier around schools. How did Ann Arbor localize these values in their policies to protect individual neighborhoods and protect children in their homes and backyards? And this amendment, if this amendment truly is about creating better alignment between Ann Arbor and the state policies, is this the right way? Also, please remember that the marijuana businesses and impacted property owners do not need this change. For sure, they would like the change. What business wouldn't like less restrictions? But they willingly accepted these restrictions when they started these endeavors. It is only the local residents that are losing protections in this amendment, if this amendment passes. In addition, the proposed change marks a large change from Ann Arbor's past philosophy of spreading out of the marijuana facilities. For such a large shift, where was the citywide feedback? Where was the city seeking the input of neighboring residents to these facilities? It just does not feel that this large-scale amendment is being recognized and treated as such. After all this, if you still are going to vote for this amendment, I would request one small favor.
30
During the
seconds.
discussion stage, would you please announce how far you live from a marijuana site? Just a classification of 1 block, 2 blocks, or more than 2 blocks away is sufficient. That corresponds roughly to 600 feet, 1,000, or over 1,000. Additionally, what efforts did you make to speak with residents who live within 600 feet of these sites? For the record, my family lives within 600 feet of one of these sites, and I'm firmly opposed to this amendment. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Mayor, I don't have any other callers on the line with their hands up.
Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 2, an ordinance to amend sections 5.16.1.a, 5.16.2.a, 5.16.2.b, 5.16.3.j, 5.16.3.p, 5.16.4.b, 5.16.6.c, 5.16.6.g, and to repeal and replace sections 5.19 of Chapter 55 Unified Development Code of Title 5 of the Code of the State of Ann Arbor. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Please.
Is the parking going on, right?
It is.
Just there's no one here, so I was like, oh, I thought there would be a lot of people here for that. All right. I'm for eliminating parking minimums, and I'm excited that it's something we're discussing today. Cars are a wasteful and dangerous transit option that pollute our city, our lungs, and our environment. They require costly and desolate land uses just to cope with traffic, and of course, parking. But eliminating parking minimums isn't just about that. It's about reducing the cost of development, making uses more affordable. It's about reducing sprawl, making our city more livable for everyone, and it's about making it more possible and beneficial to live life with or without a car. The current minimums force developers to build as if most people using the space are driving a car. This drives up the price of development, making things less affordable. It also makes it harder for people not in a car to use a development, whether it be a store or a housing complex. This encourages or realistically requires car ownership and use just to function in society. This is an extremely unenvironmental and unequitable use. Not everyone can drive a car, not everyone can buy a car, and frankly, not everyone wants a car. We should allow developers to build options for everyone. For anyone who'd say this position is pro-developer or pro-big business through its deregulation, I'd say flip the coin and ask yourself how parking minimums benefit large corporations. Required parking increases the distance between buildings and people, and by doing so requires car use, benefiting auto manufacturers and oil companies. It requires more money to be spent on development, driving up prices for everyday people, and it prevents smaller developers and shop owners from getting in on the game, making the most viable businesses large chains with money to spend. Eliminating parking minimums is good for local business, great for the environment, improves livability, and increases equity. In a time of housing and environmental crises, this is an obvious next step. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone online who'd like to speak at this public hearing?
Adam Juskevich, do you have a comment?
Hi, my name is Adam Juskevich. I'm in the 4th Ward. The previous caller, I would like to echo a lot of that. It was a great comment. I'm calling to support this amendment of the parking standards and the elimination of expensive parking mandates from our development code. As we work toward our A20 climate goals and that call for reducing vehicle miles traveled, as we move together toward Vision Zero, and as we expand public transit service with our recently passed AAATA public transportation millage, we have less and less need for car parking in the city of Ann Arbor. Despite this, we've been continuing to require developers to build parking, even if they do not have a need for it in their projects. I recently watched a zoning board of appeals meeting where an applicant wanted to build a bar and cafe in an extremely walkable, bikeable area and was asking for a variance so they could build it with fewer parking spaces. Fortunately, zoning board of appeals approved the variance, but this added extra steps and expense to building exactly the kind of walkable neighborhood amenity that we want to have in Ann Arbor. I'd love to see far less car travel in Ann Arbor, and the first step toward that is to reduce the amount of space to store them. This storage space pushes buildings farther apart, making walking and biking distances longer and encouraging people to drive cars. Please pass these changes tonight. Furthermore, I hope we can consider additional changes in the future, such as unbundling the cost of parking from people's rent, so that car-free residents can save money by not subsidizing parking for their neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Abdul Rahman, do you have a comment?
Yes, hello. Hi, my name's Abdul. I'm a student at the university, here to talk about eliminating parking minimums. I want to tell a little story personally about myself. So last year, I was in this apartment building that was non-conforming, which means that basically it doesn't conform to the zoning that was placed on it after it was constructed. And there was a myriad of reasons why it was non-conforming, but one of those reasons was that it had parking. And didn't have enough parking for the amount of parking spots that were built with it in 1961. And not to mention that the parking spots that they did have to build required them to get rid of the entire green space in the back. So it was just covered in asphalt. And here's the thing, this apartment building, I didn't need to drive anywhere. I was right next to the 4 bus, I could ride to Kroger, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods. I could walk to class. I had my bike, so I could go wherever I wanted in the city, basically. And I could ride the bus if I wanted to. Basically, I didn't need a car. But I had a parking spot, so I did actually bring a car with me. And now I'm moving into Tower Plaza, which is probably the biggest apartment building in the entire city that has 0 parking spots for residents. It has about 3 to 4 parking spots at the base for the building superintendent and for visitors. And it's fine. Dozens of people live in that building without parking because they don't need it. They can ride the bus, they can walk, they can ride their bikes. There's so many different ways to get around that don't require a car. And about parking, the speakers before me kind of talked about this, but parking is expensive. It adds a lot of embodied carbon. If you see the new building on South U that's going up, they actually have to go down 2 stories to build parking. It's a lot of parking that they're building there. We shouldn't have to do that. We should in fact incentivize not doing that, or use a stick method instead of a carrot method. Just don't do it. Building parking is bad. It uses a lot of concrete. It hurts the environment. It entrenches car dependency because it forces developments to be far apart. It makes smaller developments impossible to pencil. If you see there's a new apartment building going up on 907 Main Street, and they're building 6 bedroom units. Why? because this building is in R4C zoning, which means that they have to provide 1.5 parking spots for each unit. And so this developer has to provide, they're building 36 bedrooms. And so if they were going to make them 1 to 2 bedrooms, they'd have to provide legions of parking for this development. And it would have been impossible to build this where it is currently. When they build those 6-bedroom units, in this case on 907 915 South Main, they're able to actually build a regular apartment
30
building.
seconds.
It's normal. So it just doesn't make sense to me to force buildings to build parking when it's clear the market is not demanding parking. I don't think planners can magically determine how much parking is needed at a certain spot. So I think that we should strike this from the code and allow parking to work naturally, like it did before the introduction of parking mandates. The world was fine, it didn't burn down. And we're burning it down with parking mandates. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alex Lowe, do you have a comment?
Hi, this is Alex Lowe calling in from Ward 3. I just want to echo the previous callers in supporting this and ask if we can go a step further and to put in both parking maximums and to work as a city to get rid of free parking. Because free parking isn't free, it's just subsidized by everyone. And why should we be subsidizing parking that we're not using? We have these enormous swaths of parking at each of the big box supermarkets and stuff that go mostly unused even during very busy days. So I really would like to see that taken out of the cost of our groceries and paid for separately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandra Misselum, do you have a comment?
Yes, first time calling in, so can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay, so my name is Sandra. I'm calling in for Ward 3 in support of eliminating the parking minimums. It's really great to see the city getting rid of these outdated laws. Parking minimums are essentially climate arson. They're entrenching our car dependence, which is responsible for over 40% of the CO2 emissions from the transportation sector. Parking minimums force us to create huge amounts of impervious surface that is seldom used. If you guys have ever been down Carpenter and seen the Kroger, the Lowe's, all these stores have these giant swaths of parking that isn't being used by anyone. It's just sitting there wasting space. It's estimated there are 8 parking spots for every car in America. This land could be used for housing or parks or walkable retail districts. But instead, they're making housing, goods, and services more expensive because the land is being used so inefficiently. So hopefully this will be a good first step toward the city becoming a climate leader and improving our communities by improving walkability. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nishat Ketterpal, do you have a comment?
Yeah, hi there. My name is Nishant Ketterpal. I am a homeowner, a driver, a cyclist, and a pedestrian. I live in Ward 5, and before that I grew up in Barton Hills and been living in Ann Arbor, I guess, since 1997. So I wanted to support the repeal of parking minimums and urge you all to go a step further and enforce parking maximums, in particular for sort of downtown zoning districts in the way that I believe the TC1 zoning district does. There's no reason to be adding sort of implicit subsidies for driving and for car storage. And if people want to use land for that purpose, they should do it themselves. But we shouldn't be forcing private landowners to use land for certainly this reason. And I'm in favor of repealing parking minimums in our zoning code for all the reasons that a lot of the other callers have put in. Abdul made a great point about the preponderance of 6 unit apartment buildings that we have. And that's like one of these unintended consequences, even if, your desirable goal is we want people to be able to park to get around, you end up, producing sort of weird usages of urban space and arguably, bad usages of urban space. And so this is why I'm in favor of eliminating parking minimums. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending in 534, do you have a comment?
Good evening. This is Tom Stolberg calling from Lower Town. I'd like to mention that I believe that this is going to pass tonight, so I won't go into the details. But I'd also like to thank you. This will be financially benefit to me and my small investment group, in addition to the larger landholders and investment groups that is financially beneficial for. So again, thank you. I know some of the other people in my position, especially the larger ones, tend not to thank you for your largesse, as this council passes time and time again, things that are financially beneficial to the development class. So I want to be the one to thank you, like I did, I believe, at the last meeting, for a ordinance change that's beneficial to us. I'd also like to mention that, I've said this before, when you change ordinances like this, there's this whole spectrum of possible outcomes. What we tend to hear is a lot of cheerleading for one part of the spectrum of the outcomes, possible outcomes. We don't necessarily achieve that part of the spectrum of outcomes. Sometimes we're more likely to achieve another part of the spectrum of outcomes. But we only hear cheerleading for the best possible case scenarios. I think one of the benefits of having city council meetings is that the public can hear pros and cons discussed and weighed at the table of other possibilities that could come of such changes. Unfortunately, we have been reducing public input at multiple levels, so we're going to hear less and less of these pros and cons as we go on and go forward, especially with the new council. We expect to see changes like the site plan threshold, where then we, subsequent to that, mass rezone 70 parcels, and now we're contemplating mass rezoning over 200 parcels, and with the site plan threshold change, those will never come to council. That's just one way we've reduced a public hearing, reduced public awareness. And I know there's some other things that have been mentioned as pros and cons, and I agree that those are valid pros and cons, and that we should keep discussing those in the public forum. That's the appropriate place, not just making them go away. So back to this one in particular.
30 seconds.
I think there's a lot of cons that haven't been mentioned, and I'm hoping people will bring those up at the table. We're not automatically going to get what everybody thinks we're going to get. It's easy to picture a sea of parking available and say, let's get rid of that. But when you really drill down to the details, there's other factors that come into play, and I hope to hear a discussion of those. But again, I thank you from me and my investment group for the financial benefit you're giving us tonight.
Thank you.
Michelle Hughes, do you have a comment?
Hi. So yeah, I'm excited about removing parking minimums. The things that I'm excited about Ann Arbor are not parking. It's, I think a lot of people in the city like the culture here. We like that it's a funky place. We like that our friends are here. We like that there are activities and things to do. And all of those things are things that are hurt by the addition of parking, because it makes everything further away from each other. And, when things get further away from each other, then our friends are harder to visit, our loved ones are harder to visit, our relatives are harder to visit. If, we can live closer together, we can walk over to their house, we can take the bus. If we live further away from everything that we care about, then that car better work. And we can live in that way in any of the suburbs in Michigan. We can go just from our house to our car, and then to a parking lot, and then into another building. We can get that anywhere, but we chose to live in Ann Arbor for a reason. And most of the reasons we like Ann Arbor are things that were built before parking minimums were created. We don't want to live in the suburban way, and that's why we live in Ann Arbor. There are close downtown neighborhoods that we love so much that we declared them historic and said that, this is the way we want these neighborhoods to be forever. And, it's the neighborhoods that we protected are the ones that we built without parking minimums. And, I don't see a whole lot of people moving to try to make suburban neighborhoods with single-family homes and parking and, giant big box stores with parking lots. People aren't trying to make those historic districts because they're not something that anyone's actually interested in. We want a city that's full of cool stuff right next to us. That's why we live here. So I am excited to see that we're going to make our laws reflect our values and that we want a city that's full of things. Thanks.
Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending in 326, do you have a comment? Press *6 to unmute your phone. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Jamie McGarrett from Ward 3, and calling just to touch on a couple of things in regards to the topic. I want to talk a little bit about resilience. So we've heard a lot of things about climate change and the impacts that automobiles have on climate change, exacerbating climate change, a primary cause of it, not just in terms of driving, but in terms of parking, surfaces, et cetera, and the lack of housing. And so people have touched on all those things. The other aspect of it is resilience, right? So the less reliance that we have on automobiles in our community, the more resilient we are, particularly as raw materials become harder to find, as the energy to run these vehicles becomes harder to get and to facilitate. We're doing a transition to renewables, but that's a slow transition. And even with renewables, there's issues with batteries and whatnot. So it's about resilience as well in the face of climate change. It's also about socialization and being able to be connected in a community that you value very much, the things at ground level. So there's research, for example, that shows that people that walk and bike are more frequent contributors to shops at street level. There's also more opportunity for communication and whatnot with just people on the street, what are called loose connections. And researchers have called loose connections the people that you run into that you don't necessarily know, but they might be on the street next to you waiting for a bus or in line at a grocery store or something like that. Last, I want to close out with a personal anecdote. I generally don't talk about my family very often in the political sphere. I try to keep that private. But I do want to mention that this weekend, for example, my son, who just turned 2 a couple of weeks ago, and I took the bus downtown. We did some grocery shopping. We stopped for a snack, actually, at a restaurant that is owned by one of our current council members. And then milled about and hung out and talked with people, just bumped into people around town, and then went and took the bus back home. The reason I'm sharing that is because I want to provide an example of more than just, oh, I'm an individual who's lived without a car, and I've talked about this. I've lived in Ann Arbor for 30-some odd years without a car. But now with a family and with a child, I have this young child, and I'm able to do all of the things necessary. His swim class is on the bus line.
30 seconds.
The museum downtown, things of that nature. There's so many things that are accessible without having a car that it's not limited to just sort of this vision from individuals on their own. It's about families as well. So I just wanted to share that with you. And across the spectrum, there are people who value a car that is not a single occupant vehicle focused in the society. So thank you very much. I hope you support this. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending in 403, do you have a comment? Caller 403.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. Thanks for responding. This is Jim Pike calling from Ward 5, and I just want to very briefly say that I support the elimination of parking minimums. I try to drive my car as little as possible, and I have biked to work every day, basically for at least 15 years now, and I bike to do the majority of my grocery shopping. I think we really have to start pushing people to change their lifestyles from being so car dependent, and one of them is to reduce the amount of available parking, and if we can get more housing, in the bargain too, then so much the better. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to be another voice of support for eliminating parking minimums. So that's all. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Mayor, there are no other callers on the line with their hands up.
Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. A1, we have before us the regular session meeting minutes of August 4, 2022. May I have a motion, please, to approve these minutes? Moved by Councilmember Iyer, second by Councilmember Nelson. Discussion of the minutes. All in favor? Opposed? The minutes are approved. B1, an ordinance to amend section 5.16.3G, 5.20.10, and 5.30.1 of Chapter 55, Unified Development Code of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, marijuana licenses, trees in the right-of-way, landscape modifications. Moved by Councilmember Dish, second by Councilmember Hayner. Discussion, please, of B1. Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, I wasn't here last week, or I would have asked the same thing about some UDC text changes that were before us last week. I don't feel that it's entirely appropriate to take three relatively unrelated text changes to UDC and put them in the same resolution. I don't, for instance, I support one of these and don't support two of these, and yet don't have the choice of voting independently on them. So I would move that we separate 516, which is the marijuana code, away from the other two and take a separate conversation and vote on these items. I mean, we could split them into threes if anyone preferred, but that's the way my vote splits on these three items. And I'm not sure that I have greater concerns about making these text changes. We make a lot of so-called text changes, which is sort of, in my view, is a way of avoiding public comment. So,
Councilor, you've moved for a division. Would you repeat which one was that?
I would like to divide 516.3, which is the marijuana stacking, from the other two.
Is there a second? Second by Councilor Malawi. Is that motion friendly? Councilor Hayner, let's deal with 5.16.1.3.g for the time being.
Well, thank you for doing that. And like I say, we piled a lot of UDC changes, and we call them text changes, but some of these are substantive changes. I know we've seen it before. And, because we do them as text changes, notice is not given. And we had some folks at the public hearing, and I was perfectly willing to support this, the marijuana license stacking, this 516.3G change. But we did hear from folks. I live about 8 blocks from the closest marijuana dispensary, I would say. It's the one that's called Information Entropy down there on Broadway. And it's not really close to me, but I go by it every day. And I think it's reasonably located. Now, it would be difficult for me to picture a growing, processing, and so on facility. I guess I might live, as the crow flies, closer to the large growing and processing facility that's on North Main. I am sympathetic with folks who say we didn't give proper notice when we considered these text changes, although I I don't foresee this really creating problems in these neighborhoods with the stacking of them because of our other controls, but I just wanted to get that out there that I agree that a text change in this case has failed to properly notify people. And so that's all. I appreciate you allowing the separation of these topics.
Further discussion of 5.16.3.g. Councilmember Rumlawi, then Nelson.
Thanks. I was going to ask for the same thing, actually. These are all wildly, I shouldn't say all wildly different, but the marijuana one is a whole different other policy issue than the other two, and I was going to move to do the same thing. We've been very supportive of the marijuana industry. I've been very supportive of it. But I do have concerns here that we've really morphed what we're doing with this business and this industry without full examination and without greater public input and involvement. And this industry is going under massive consolidation. This is no longer a mom and pop shop type of business. This is huge money. It's going through a big change. I don't like the location of at least one that is in a residential area that's very sensitive. We heard from a constituent tonight. I don't see this being done in a way that is to the intent, and that was to help small businesses, help people get that those days are over when it comes to marijuana licensing and marijuana and selling and all that. So right now, I think it's time to pause. I think let that industry, figure itself out and respect the wishes of the neighborhood. I know that there are some people, again, that are, not everybody's all about it. And I think it's time to just take a pause on this and let things settle down. But I don't see this helping the small business get into this industry.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective, Councilmember Rumlawi, and I actually agree with quite a lot of it. I'm not going to be able to support this for a lot of the reasons that Councilmember Rumlawi stated. Additionally, I have a problem with allowing the curbside service. I think that Councilmember Rumlawi hit on something that I hear from constituents as well. We are looking at big business that is increasingly big corporate business. I know that these dispensaries are meeting a need in our community, and I don't have a problem with how they are functioning in our community. Some of our residents do. I had a constituent point out to me that there was a dispensary that she felt was advertising itself in a misleading way that seemed to cater to children. It looked like Cookie Monster. I will not be able to support this amendment. I think that the dispensaries are thriving without additional help in terms of making it easier to grow. I would definitely be interested in taking a look at how they're functioning now before we start growing them more.
Councilmember Dish.
I appreciate the points that are being made. I think it's important to realize that the most significant changes proposed by this ordinance apply only to a cannabis business that is located on lots zoned industrial. So such businesses would be permitted to stack or hold up to 5 licenses per lot. But, so that's one thing. If you're not on a lot zoned industrial, you don't get more than one. Although, if you are in a lot zoned research or office research light industrial, you can get up to 2 licenses per lot. So it isn't as if all of a sudden every single dispensary in town will be able to stack licenses. That's just not correct. In terms of the curbside pickup, which will mostly mean pickup in parking lots, that is something that people have been doing during COVID with the cannabis business, industry, as well as with restaurants and just about everything else you can get carried over to your car. This amendment just makes that COVID protocol, which didn't cause any harm or problem, into a normal protocol. The same proof of identity for curbside pickup is required as for in-store purchase, because those are state requirements and the providers have to meet them. We are not adding opportunities for additional provisioning center, retail, or consumption licenses. Those remain capped at 28 total each. And I have spoken with entrepreneurs in this area who are local, who are not big corporate folk, who have said that stacking will lower the costs of entry into this business. Part of the reason we have seen so many chains come to us is, and so why we have so few local entrepreneurs in this business, is because of the high cost of entry. And so we can't look at what we have now and say, well, that's the kind of business it is. It is that in part because of the regulations that we currently have. And so we are making a change that it is possible will lower the cost of entry, because it will allow 5 different kinds of license holders to group under one roof.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments of Councilmember Dish, and I understand it better now, but I would prefer that this go back to staff and we have a transparent process where people can weigh in if they live in a neighborhood close to what was approved as a pharmacy, because I think that there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear here, and this is not a good process for us to lump all this together and push it through. To my knowledge, and I'd like to ask staff this question, I believe we only have one minority-owned dispensary in this community, okay? And I have some personal information about the struggles with that one minority-owned dispensary. I'm not going to go into them right now, but we can't make assumptions that are best-case scenario. So I will not be supporting this. I would support it if it came back with the information and we gave the neighbors the opportunity to weigh in. So it didn't feel, it just reminds me of TC1. I mean, let's just do it because it's a great idea, and that's not the case here.
Councilmember Briggs.
Well, I'll let Councilmember Dish perhaps speak a little bit more to process, but I certainly know that this has had a process. It has gone through Planning Commission, and I've watched that session myself and listened to the public comment that occurred there. So I do know that there has been an opportunity for public input before it came to council. I think it's important to note that, especially when many of these discussions around residential areas are around dispensaries that might then get a license for a consumption center, and it's important to know that that actually does still require a public process. It would require a special exception use, and so that would go before the Planning Commission again, and there would be another public hearing, and so there's really no need to send it back to planning to have more of a public process, because that will exist if there's an application for a consumption center. So, I think that residents will have an opportunity to weigh in on this as they move forward, if this is something that different provisioning centers apply for.
Councilmember Iyer.
Thank you. I'm happy to support this change. Having talked with Councilmember Dish about it and asking my questions and having her walk me through, in particular, what she was just talking about in terms of reducing the barrier to entry. To me, that's really important. It's a big goal of mine to help, however we can as a policymaking body, create a greater diversity of business owners, of people who are able to come in and do business in the city, and to make it more accessible to people who don't have access to loads of capital to get started. So I'm perfectly comfortable with this change and with the process that's undergone so far, and with what will move forward, and the process that always happens when there are applications for these types of things in the future. So happy to support this tonight.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
Yeah, as someone mentioned tonight, this is about big money, aggressive big money, and reducing the barrier to entry, that is great. Greater diversity, absolutely. But that's not reality in this community regarding the marijuana market. And so I'd like to have staff look at this and have it come back so that we understand exactly what the reality is. We can't just base it on wishful thinking, because it's not going to be realized that way. So let's get all the facts. Let's make sure the public is engaged. And I just want to say, yes, the Planning Commission has a process, but the Planning Commission is not elected by the public. They're not answerable to the public. And so council needs to ask these difficult questions and get the answers for our constituents. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Ramlawi.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I'll just continue to push back on the fact that this is going to open it up for smaller entrepreneurs. I think those days are long gone. Again, we have mission creep at this industry. I'm just a bit confused by some of the statements that have been made, that this wouldn't affect more than a handful of current licensed facilities. If I could have staff give us an executive summary real quick on what this does and how many places it affects, if we could. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. I'm Brett Leonard. I'm the planning manager. Councilmember Allen, I don't have a specific number. What it does is it eliminates restrictions on the number of licenses per property. So it does increase the opportunity for multiple licenses to be issued. That is, it could be a provisioning center, retailer, and a designated consumption facility, as is currently permitted in our ordinance. It could allow 2 growers or 3 growers or 5 growers at the same property, whereas under our current ordinance, that could not be permissible. So it does not change any of the locational requirements. It doesn't change the process requirements as has previously been discussed with the
Thank you.
Councilmember Iyer.
Thank you. Just one other quick thought. It occurred to me as we were sitting here talking that, to me, a good analogy to this is a food truck situation. You get a group of, I'm thinking about downtown Home and Garden when they had their food truck parking lot that actually ended up launching new restaurants in our community that went on to be very successful. And they were able to do that because they were able to collaborate kind of in a sort of a co-op situation and get their start. And I think it sort of defies logic to me that this wouldn't be somehow helpful in the marijuana industry, the way food truck situations are in the restaurant industry.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please. Pardon me. This is only with respect to 5.16.3.g. Roll call vote, please, with respect to 5.16.3.g. Starting with Councilmember Briggs.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Romali?
No.
Councilmember Hayner?
Yes.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
No.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
No.
Motion carries.
Further discussion of 5.20.10 and 5.30.1. Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Well, thanks. Just real briefly, something I wanted to add to this that, I mean, I don't support these text changes like this. I don't love the processes involved. And, you know, that's for me to say. It's a shame that we're not doing more to encourage xeriscaping or water reduction, drought-type landscaping. I saw that was substituted, some other stuff was substituted for that because it doesn't really come up. But it should, because you may recall that the tiering of the water rates, the changing of the tiering of the water rates was partially based on the considerations of irrigation in our communities. And while I don't think that was applied properly in that many multifamily units use irrigation, apartment complexes and so on, and they got a break. And it was claimed that Ann Arbor Hills and other wealthy areas of our community do use irrigation, and I'm sure they do. I mean, I don't. I do sort of a rain gardening, xeriscaping kind of thing at my place. Anyway, point is, we should be encouraging it, not striking it from this. And I also don't like the way it shrinks the calculations on landscape modifications and trees and so on. I'm just sort of unhappy with what's before me, so I'm not going to support it. Thank you.
Councilmember Dish.
Okay, so if I'm understanding these modifications correctly, and I invite Mr. Leonard to chime in after I've spoken, the one modification is just to exclude the width of curb cuts from the linear feet that go into calculating how many street trees need to be provided. So it's one street tree for every 45 linear feet, but excluding curb cuts in calculating 45 linear feet. And in the, with the landscape modifications, it's not really striking anything, it's making things a little bit more flexible. So it makes trees in the public right-of-way eligible for modifications, which they haven't been, and it spells out the conditions for getting a modification, which mostly have to do with impediments to viability. I mean, we don't want you to replace something that's working well with landscaping that may not work as well. We don't want you to put landscaping in where there are obstructions that's going to make it die. So please, Mr. Leonard, if you would like to specify further, that would be great.
Thank you, Councilmember Dish. Yes, that's the intention, and specifically with the first change, as you indicated, there's also a removal of an escrow, which was a pretty modest amount that is duplicitous. We have the ability to enforce that provision without that by the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. So that's trying to just improve and create a more efficient process. As it relates to landscape modifications, landscape modification actually predated the requirements for street trees. And so what happened is those street tree requirements were added to our landscape requirements post that change. That was never reflected. So part of this is that intent. Similar as you described, it could be some of the recent instances where we've sought, applicants have sought a variance in the circumstances were fully supported by the city because they might create a safety visibility issue, they might be in an area of contamination, they might be in an area of infrastructure where we don't want the street trees impacting or adversely impacting existing infrastructure. So the intention is to put these standards in place that are more apropos to actually what we've experienced. There was a comment about xeriscape. We've never had a developer invoke that as part of the requirement. And fortunately, we've really evolved over time as well that our staff and much of our petitioners are really committed to native landscaping and the like. And we look at those native species and the like to encourage success in those plants that might do better with less watering as well.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, with respect to 5.20.10 and 5.30.1, starting with Councilmember Briggs.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Romali?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yeah, yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Grant?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
9:25, let's take a short break. Reconvene, please, at 9:35. 5.2.a, 5.16.2.b, 5.16.3.j, 5.16.3.p, 5.16.4.b, 5.16.6.c, 5.16.6.d, and to repeal and replace section 5.19, chapter 55, entitled Walton Code of Title 5, proposed repeal and order. Moved by Councilor Rish, seconded by Councilor Briggs. Question two.
So the elimination of parking minimums is an enormous and long-awaited step forward to our affordable housing goals and, as Mr. Juskevich mentioned, to our vision for 20-minute neighborhoods. This ordinance affirms that it's better to use space to house people than store cars, and it's better still to pare away wasteful expense from the cost of housing people. So mandatory parking minimums add unnecessary expense. All of that is pretty easy and uncontroversial. We heard a lot about, well, let's take the next step and do a parking maximum. And in fact, this ordinance does go another step and set a parking maximum for TC1 in two ways. The first way is it sets a cap at 3 parking spaces for 1,000 square feet of floor area. And that's good. Staff decided that these are ideally these are mixed use developments, and it set the number at something that could flex, that would be a little bit more than you would need for a strictly residential place, but less than you would need for a strict office building. So that seems like a good approach for now. We'll see how it works. But an important thing to know is that this ordinance also governs how that parking can be provided. There is a legislative barrier to seas of parking because we have limited the square footage that can be devoted to surface parking. The size of a surface lot cannot exceed the footprint of the building. If a development does not reach its max with a surface lot, and if there is a desire for more, additional spaces must be provided with structured parking. Parking structures are expensive. So there is a regulatory limit to the amount of parking to be provided and a built-in financial disincentive to providing more than is necessary.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. I mean, there's a lot of factors that come into play here. We just had a 240% increase in the transit millage, and I don't wonder how many cars that's going to remove from our community. I wish that we did more. I wish that this did more. When we talk about, say, TC1 as the example that was just given, that, we need to require places for the service vehicles especially. We need to require places for these vehicles to get off of our streets. It creates serious hazards when we don't have that in our UDC, in our planning and zoning requirements, that there are vehicle zones off of our streets, and it's a fallacy to presume that there will be no service vehicles moving through our community in the next decade or two. It just defies the reality of the built environment that we live in. Every single building that we build, especially large building, just take a look in their parking, and it's full of service vehicles every day. I don't even know where to start. This is making it cheaper to build, that's for sure. Tom Stahlberg mentioned that in the call-in. It does create the potential for more square footage, but really we're leaving up to the industry and, what could possibly go wrong with that. It may or may not reduce the amount of cars used in our community. It may just push the problem into the streets, into neighborhoods and other supposed public spaces. I think it's not necessary anymore to pretend that we aren't trying to get rid of cars in our community. Quite clearly we are. Now, is it a step too far to say that this council's policies in adopting this and others are anti-car? Perhaps that is too harsh a language, but that's the essence of it. We are presuming that by not allowing a place for cars to exist, be they gasoline or electric, that we are going to be rid of cars. And I'm not sure that, we can be hopeful for that. I'm not sure that there's any evidence to suggest otherwise. as far as 20-minute neighborhoods go, I think that we can all value that notion, and yet we've had it pushed in our face and are about to have it pushed in our face time and time again. Say the George that's going to come before us, that they're going to turn that all over to residential. There's not going to be any 20-minute neighborhood action there if we approve that. Just like there isn't any barely any 20-minute neighborhood left at Lower Town, my neighborhood. I bought my house so I could walk to work and walk to Kroger, and now I can do neither. So doing away with parking minimums, is it a step in the right direction? Time will tell. I'm kind of torn on this one. I think it's appropriate to say that we do have seas of parking, but I think there's other ways to approach it that aren't part of this conversation, and I think that's unfortunate.
Councilmember Councilmember Briggs.
Thank you. I am excited to be passing this this evening, or voting in favor of it this evening. I think we heard a great deal of enthusiasm during public comment, which is really wonderful to see how this is being received by our community. I think it's very much in line with the plans that we've recently adopted in terms of our carbon neutrality plan, our transportation plan. That's both of which have called for this, both of which were unanimously adopted at this body, and both of which did call upon us to figure out ways to reduce car usage in our community for a variety of good reasons. Climate change is happening, and we need to be planning for our future in a way that's beneficial. But in terms of restricting cars, all that this is doing is removing the requirement to have parking minimum. Developers are still likely going to determine what level of parking they need in their development, and that leaves it to the market to determine whether or not there is a need for parking at that space, or and not to overpark that area, which is what we have done historically all across the United States. So this is definitely a beneficial move forward for our community, and it's a beneficial move forward for our country, because we're seeing this trend all across the United States. In terms of whether or not it's working, we're still really fairly early in this trend, but I'm looking at a 2022 article from American Planning Association. I'll just read briefly from it. In Seattle and Buffalo, separate groups of academic researchers in 2020 and 2021 respectively found that after policy changes concerning parking minimums, a large portion of developers did build less parking than previously required, and they particularly took advantage of the cost savings to build mixed-use projects. And in San Diego, another group of academic researchers in 2021 found that in the first year after parking reforms, proposals for affordable housing units jumped fivefold. These are the changes that we've said that we want to see in our community, and these are the policy reforms that will help us get us there.
Councilmember Dish.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question of Mr. Leonard. And I just wondered if the UDC would be the place to regulate provision of space for service vehicles.
It could be. I think it's a challenging provision because I don't think that the answers are the same throughout our community. Think about how we might want to accommodate that in our downtown versus in other areas of the city and other corridors. But they could be. That could be a regulation. In the past, communities have had loading requirements, for example, for like actual trucks at loading docks and the like. So it's possible. But I do think that, and frankly, the Planning Commission has identified that as something that warrants some attention. And I know, likewise, the Downtown Development Authority has started thinking about that in the context of curb management downtown as well.
Thank you. I strongly support this change that we're going to be making tonight. I'm really excited about it. I think this is something that checks a lot of boxes in terms of supporting our sustainability goals. Our A20 plan calls for it. Our transportation plan in terms of wanting to increase our public transit, and our affordability problem that we have here. So for all of those reasons that have already been stated, I strongly support this. There's one that doesn't often get talked about as well, and that's, I view this through an economic development lens, because large parking lots take large pieces of land out of productive use for our city. And I'm excited to, see new uses for those spaces. Again, as others have mentioned, this is removing the minimum doesn't mean there won't be parking. And one thing I do worry about a little bit is whether financing will sort of keep pace with this change, or if developers will still find that they need to have a certain amount of parking in order to get the financing they need. And so that is something that I think we're going to have to just keep an eye on and monitor how it's working and try to find out if people are still building large amounts of parking, try to suss out why that is. Is it really the market or is it the financing piece? And then try to tackle that as well. But overall, I'm really excited about this step. I think it's a great first step, and I'll be supporting it.
Councilmember Omlawi.
Thank you. I don't share the kind of enthusiastic optimism for this change. What I'm hearing mostly is that we're going to allow the market to figure this out. The same market and the same greed that got us here in the first place is now going to help us. So I don't share this great sense of optimism that this one change here is going to usher in all these social benefits. My problem with this is that, again, we're messing with land use in a piecemeal fashion. Cities are systems. Transportation is an integral part of land use. So we're doing this outside of the comprehensive land use plan review. It should have been done nearly 5 years ago. And we're saying that the market is going to fix it for us. We're going to, again, change things like we did in TC1 and tell people it's going to bring you all this public benefit without any assurances, without embedding the sustainability and the affordability measures that we can when we do these things. I'm just not so sure that we can call things out that happen in California and say they're going to happen in Michigan. There are so many different things there that it's not a fair comparison, and one that I wouldn't use, but people are free to use it. What we're doing here is we're trying to do some social engineering, but then we're going to allow the market to figure it out. The same market that is driven by profit. That's what drives the market, not feel-good stories and not things for the public benefit. I mean, that's where I ultimately differ from many of my colleagues. There are going to be external costs being placed on others, but people who have money will continue to have the same type of lifestyle.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. Mr. Leonard, hopefully I'll phrase this the right way that I can get the kind of answer you can understand where I'm getting at. So state law allowed us to create and maintain standards for parking, in this case, parking minimums. So essentially we were requiring developers or property owners to build a certain thing, parking, at some level. So what is it that differentiates our requiring, and now we're removing that, we're lowering it. We're saying you're not required to build parking to a certain level. What is the difference in state law and local law that allows us to say you must build a certain way with parking, but we are unable to say you must build a net zero building, you must build a certain affordability component into your building? And then we have to kind of dodge around the edges of things and not just come right out and say, this is what we need and we should wait for the types of developments that are going to provide that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Why is parking isolated from this and just one of the many tools we have to hopefully enact the actual policy goals that we share?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't profess to be an expert in all aspects of it, but parking has a long history of being really central to land use policy. Communities have traditionally regulated parking as part of land use development, the sort of how land may be developed that's corollary to the uses and the location of those things. When you get into items like affordable housing or building performance, there are other regulatory frameworks in place at the state that govern those specifically. The Planning Act and Zoning Act enables us to govern parking. We have things like building codes that govern building performance. We have other statutes that limit our ability to dictate how much somebody can sell their home for or how much somebody can rent their home for. And so the short answer is it comes from different legislative frameworks that provide us as a municipality and every other municipality in the state to do some things and not others.
Councilmember Rodina.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to echo some of the enthusiasm for this proposal that I heard from some of my colleagues earlier and actually from many members of the public who called into the public hearing to discuss this and you know, also the response, unanimous response we got from both planning and transportation recommending this change. I think we've often talked about planning, or at least I have talked about with my neighbors, planning our neighborhoods and our community to support businesses like an Argus or a Ruse that folks can walk to, these walkable, bikeable neighborhoods with things nearby that really not only enrich our community, but become places of gathering and service. And these are the types of changes that are necessary in order for us to plan for that community going forward. You know, as we heard from one of the examples during the public hearing, not every business or entity moving into our community requires a massive parking lot to support it. And allowing for the business needs of individual businesses to dictate whether or not they need additional parking is something that not only makes sense, but as Councilmember Iyer pointed out, allows for additional potential economic drivers to come into our community and fill that space, as opposed to empty parking spaces like we see around, you know, Briarwood Mall, for example. And so I think this is an opportunity. You know, one of the other things that I think we often hear about as we make planning decisions is the amount of green space and trees and things like that we love in our community. But as we continue to fill those spaces, those green spaces, with more and more concrete and continue to sprawl out into neighboring townships because we've filled space with parking lots, I don't think that's the community that I envision. I don't think it's the community that our neighbors envision that supports kind of that walkable, bikeable lifestyle that we're hoping to create here. And so, like Councilmember Iyer, I think we need to keep our eyes on the financing issue and learn as we move forward, because that is something I have regularly heard as well, that unfortunately, you know, while we may be saying here today that government is not going to dictate to you how many parking spaces you need to support your business, in many cases, there are financing institutions who are still doing that. And so making sure that as we consider this going forward, we keep our eye on that is, I think, an important point well made.
Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. Councilmember Medina,
spoke a lot about what I wanted to, which was our local businesses, but I've heard directly from some of the businesses in my neighborhoods, their enthusiasm for us getting rid of parking minimums. And if we do want 20-minute neighborhoods, then it's something we have to do. And I think it is important. You can, if you just do a quick search for parking minimums map or eliminate parking minimums map, you'll see that this is not something that's exclusive to the coasts. It's not something that's exclusive to places that just have, warm weather. This is really something we're really behind as a community, and we're just trying to keep up with best practice. So almost every state in the country has at least a city that's eliminated parking minimums. If they can do it in North Dakota, we can certainly do it here. So, I think it's important that, and I will, thank some of my colleagues. I think I'm a fairly pragmatic person, but sometimes they really make me feel like a, radical optimist or something. But it really, I'm just so excited about this. This was definitely on my list of things that I think the community really wanted to see, that I wanted to get done before my time was done on council. And I do think it's low-hanging fruit. I'm looking forward to what the next steps are as we move into our comprehensive land use plan.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
Yeah, I hope that we can move beyond parking, because when I talk to my constituents, 99% of them do not bring up parking one way or the other. Just let the market drive parking. We don't need to be discussing it. And we've paid for a comprehensive land use planning process. It's required by the state. I think that we should move forward with it. But our responsibility as a local governmental entity is safety services, police and fire, safe water, safe transport. We need roads that are safe, crosswalks. And when we have this fixation on parking, then those other safety services are suffering. So I will be supporting this, and I hope we don't have to talk about parking again until we discuss the comprehensive land use plan.
Councilmember Amlawi.
Thank you. I just want to clear up a little bit of my position here, and it's not that I'm against this. It's that the process that we're undertaking to do it in, I don't think gives us the best result. I don't think it yields us the best outcome for the policy goals that we have. That's my problem with it. I'll be supporting it tonight, but I think it's going to have a lot of unintended consequences that could have been avoided. It probably could have had better outcomes to achieve our 820 goals or Vision Zero. I think we're going to have external costs being placed on others who don't experience it today. You're obviously going to need greater need for residential parking permits. People are going to need to be paying for those in addition to everything else they pay for living in the city. And so that's fine. The cost of owning a car is going to go up. But that, I just, again, wanted to clear the fact that I do support this. I just wish that we were doing it in a more comprehensive and holistic way. Thank you.
Councilmember Song.
I'm a fan of the nonprofit Strong Towns. It's an organization that advocates for cities of all sizes to be safe, livable, and inviting by promoting patterns of development that are financially strong and resilient. You'll find in their site articles on parking reform, including one titled "Less Parking Lots, More People Space," which is the sentiment that I share in support of this ordinance change. There's also a national map tracking cities that have eliminated parking minimums, which in Michigan are Traverse City, Grand Rapids, Lansing, Detroit, Berrien Springs, and Ecorse. I also noted that South Bend, just over the Michigan border, has also eliminated parking minimums, and I'd be delighted to share with Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, formerly known as Mayor Pete, that Ann Arbor has been added to this map. We will join over 200 cities that have already gone down this path. If we are searching for examples, I would encourage folks to look at Fayetteville, Arkansas, one of the first cities to eliminate parking minimums in this country, with the rationale that they are an overreach of government that harms local businesses, small-scale developers, homeowners, and renters. Since its passage, Fayetteville has seen an increase of new restaurants opening, vacant lots getting filled, and city staff having a much quicker process to approve new permits for development and business startups. I would like to see similar improvements here in Ann Arbor.
Further discussion? Councilmember Briggs.
I'm not going to talk about how fantastic this is again. However, I did want to address a point that's come up a couple of times about whether or not this is an appropriate process to use. And I think I've heard it a number of times come up at the table that, you know, we need to wait until the comprehensive land use plan starts, and that's when we should do these things. And I think it's important to stress that it's not like we begin that process and throw out everything that we've done to date. The comprehensive land use plan is a compilation of many, many documents, including the transportation plan, including our carbon neutrality plan, which are calling for these. These are recent planning efforts that we've done that we are moving forward with in a timely fashion. There's also staff in the memo has pointed to the fact that this is already a part of our master plan in the land use element, which is something, as we've noted around the table, that it's been quite a while since we've done that plan. This is overdue. We're not ahead of schedule. It's not outside of process. It is utilizing the process, and as we move forward in the comprehensive land use, in the next plan, which is great, we definitely need to get it underway. I was part of the group that in 2019 brought, on planning commission and sent something to council, and it was tabled here at this table. So we definitely need to get it started, but it's going to be building on what we've done in the past.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Briggs.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Mlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
C1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 55 zoning, rezoning of .15 acres from C1B, Community Convenience Center District, to PUD, Planned Unit Development District 340 Depot, zoning and supplemental regulations 340 Depot. Moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Hayner. Discussion, please, of C1. Councilmember Dish.
So this is a PUD, proposed zoning, for 340 Depot Street. It will be a mixed-use development across from the Amtrak station and east of the Garnet. So it's a PUD. What are its public benefits? This is an infill project. Yay. It is, as I said, mixed use. There will be mixed use of minimum 1,300 square feet. It will provide four relatively small residential units, which helps to fill a need for diverse housing stock. There will be 2,000 square feet minimum of a green roof, and we expect cleanup of contaminated soil because we think that there is some underneath the existing structure. Why does it come to us as a PUD? The reason is that the developer is making a request for a very small deviation from code, and that is to be released from the conflicting use buffer that is required for the east and south sides of the parcel. And I don't want to put this I'm struggling for words because I don't want to put this in a way that sounds like I'm slamming anyone, but essentially, once the Garnet was approved on the neighboring parcel, that triggered this residential use buffer. The Garnet itself is built to the property line. And so this proposed development is asking for the same thing that the Garnet was able to make use of. And, if I mangled that horribly, Mr. Leonard is here. I want to just offer, I know that you're all noticing that, gee, this is a PUD and it comes to us from Planning Commission, which can go for 2 hours on a by right plan, asking the developer why they aren't electrifying, and couldn't they please look into heat pumps and everything else. And why does this come to us without electrification? Because here's a place, it's a rezoning, we can ask for that. Well, this project came twice before the Planning Commission, because that's what happens. You have a pre-meeting with a PUD person. We asked for many changes regarding pedestrian amenities and activating the first floor with retail and office space, and for the patio that's adjacent to the public sidewalk. We asked for all that, we got it. They are not asking us for much. They accommodated many goals that we have. It didn't feel that electrification was a proportionate request as compared to what the developer is asking us for, or a proportionate demand. I admit I want to fairly represent the Planning Commission's deliberations because I am part of the commission.
Councilmember?
I also want to, sorry, yep, that's good.
Councilmember Hayner.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I can't take up where you're going because I wasn't part of those, but I know when the Garnet was in its formative stages, Mr. Pfaff went to the owner of that property and the developers of that property and asked to combine the 2 lots into one PUD to get something greater than the 2 being developed separately. And that didn't happen, unfortunately. And just as a joke, I told him, build your thing as high as you possibly can so that those people can't see the river. And we were kind of joking about it. And he didn't want to do that because he's a decent man who is trying to build something that's modest on this site, that he has a long history of providing very modest rents for the tenants of those current office spaces for decades now. And so this is what he wanted to build, and it was unfortunate, as Councilwoman Dish said, that the Garnet PUD got right to the edge. And so I think this is a reasonable request, and I think it's a reasonable compromise because of the affordability that's going to come from these smaller units, unlike the small units on Broadway that are very expensive. I don't believe these are going to be. I don't know what it says in the development agreement, but I'd be shocked if they were going to be very expensive. There are 6 testing wellheads on that site, and a year and a half ago, Mishcon did a huge amount of remediation everywhere but where the building stands. And I was down there to observe that. And there's definitely a need to bring this up to the residential standards of Eagle, and that will happen with this development. And I know that that was one thing that the developer's been very concerned about, is sitting on this polluted site. And so this is a win in many ways for the city in an active transportation area right across from the train station and so on, and really very near downtown on several bus lines and so on. And it's the right thing to do, and it's another example of how a PUD should remain in our toolbox as a viable method of getting reasonable public compromises out of projects. So I fully support this.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
This is mixed use, so I'm just wondering what actions would be needed if they decided after it was built to convert the commercial to residential?
Good evening, City Council. Matthew Kowalski, City Planner for the project. I can definitely answer that question. That the requirement for the mixed use is built directly into the supplemental regulations, as you know, for the first floor. So basically, as part of the zoning regulations, if that first floor, if they wanted to convert that away from those uses that are required within the supplemental regulations, it would in a sense be a rezoning. They would have to come back to City Council to change what the allowable uses are within the supplemental regulations.
Okay, thanks.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. DC1, resolution to appoint Eric Farrell to the Public Market Advisory Commission, moved by Councilmember Iyer, second by Councilmember Dish. Discussion, please, of DC1. All in favor? Opposed? It is approved with 11 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 7-vote requirement. DC2, resolution to authorize city administrator to execute a letter to the Michigan Department of Transportation, MDOT, in support of a noise abatement program and environmental impact study of noise for M14, moved by Councilmember Alawi, second by Councilmember Dish. Discussion, Briggs. Discussion, please, of DC2. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. This is an issue that has been growing in the Fifth Ward for many years. The noise that is coming off the freeway and into the surrounding areas, including a school and our park, Bird Hills, Wines and Forsyth being the schools that are affected by this. This is was originally discovered many years ago, and MDOT has reportedly publicly admitted that this was a design flaw when the freeway was first built in the 70s. But the noise has gotten worse with recent work that's been done on the freeway with concrete replacement. And as you're walking the neighborhoods in the area and the crescents and other areas, you can hear the sound from well over 1,000 feet away. You know, if the wind is blowing right, you have, serious issues. I mean, health issues. There was a petition that the neighborhood put together at over 600 signatures asking for intervention, asking for help here. There's been many meetings with State Senator Jeff Irwin. There's been meetings with school members, staff. Myself and Councilmember Briggs have been in meetings. And we've just hit a lot of dead ends getting this addressed. So the residents of the Fifth Ward have asked me and Councilmember Briggs to do more and to raise their voice and bring this concern to the forefront as much as possible, just like we did with the case of the M14 resolution about a year ago, when we've had major accidents and fatalities and environmental damage. We're asking that our city administrator write a letter to MDOT looking into noise abatement programs. But we're asking that this doesn't, or at least I am, that this doesn't stop with this letter, that this board, this body, and this community continue to advocate to mitigate the environmental pollution and the noise and the health concerns that residents have in that area. Thank you.
Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, just to concur with Councilmember Rumlawi, this is an ongoing issue that we're certainly hearing loudly from our Fifth Ward residents about. I know it's also an issue in the First Ward as well. Councilmember Rumlawi spoke, I think you probably remember, you can certainly find in your email inbox the petition that was sent to us with close to 600 signatures on it. Residents have done noise studies, noise readings, I should say, adjacent to a highway on the Forsyth and Wine School and found decibels, 100 decibels there. It's a challenging issue for us to solve at the local level. Honestly, it's a challenging issue for the state and to solve as well, considering the funding that's been cut for the noise abatement program and both at the state and federal level. But I think it's important that we as a city write a letter of support for a noise abatement program and environmental impact study in this area.
Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. First, obviously, I support this. I don't know what the solution is going to be. I'm going to ask to be added as a co-sponsor to further represent Ward 1. I have no doubt that MDOT will tackle this with the same speed that they have in the Barton Exchange design flaws. And yet, it is right and proper to ask. And so, used to be, I mean, you can kind of hear it from my house. I don't know, Councilwoman Dish, if you can hear that. You probably can from your place. We have a little topographical variance between our houses, but a little higher up, I think it's probably a little louder. We used to hear with regularity the testing cells at Lotus Engineering there, and now all I hear is the marijuana growing in there. And so that's a relief. You know, we used to hear the trucks winding up at night and then winding down on the dynos. You could hear it out the roof vents. It was crazy loud. And we didn't really have anything we could do about that. But there is something we can do about this. We're going to ask MDOT to look into it, and hopefully the study will justify some kind of remedial action. Again, I don't know what that's going to be. It'll probably be a pretty low priority for them, and yet this is the right thing to do. So thank you for putting this together, and I fully support it.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
I'd like to be listed as a co-sponsor and just confirm that our elected state officials, Senator Irwin and Representative Yusuf Rabi, will be copied on this. MDOT is a pretty political entity, and it took considerable effort from Senator Jeff Irwin to keep the MDOT project to install the RRFBs on Huron at the dangerous crosswalk near Thayer. And so it would not have happened, even though it took many years, in that time frame, had it not been for Senator Irwin continuing to shepherd the project. So I hope you're going to rely on him, and I'm not sure if he is going to be redistricted out of that area, and so it would be Senator, well, whoever the senator is who's elected, but I would definitely include Senator Jeff Irwin at this point. Thanks.
Further discussion? I guess I would also like to be listed as a co-sponsor to this. You know, we talk with residents throughout the city, and I certainly do as well, and folks up in this area consistently mention noise as an impediment to their quality of life. It's not something that we as a city have an ability to address on our own, but we do have the ability to advocate, and through this measure and through others, I hope as well, we will. It is important that MDOT take notice of the harm that's being caused by the current noise situation, and that they take efforts, that they take steps to remediate. Further discussion. Councilmember Amlawi.
Thank you. I appreciate my colleagues coming on board and co-sponsoring this. It gives me hope that this issue will continue to be addressed in the years following. As we've heard, this has been going on for a long time, and MDOT has dragged their feet. And this type of infrastructure improvement is not on the top of their list, unfortunately. But I believe that can change, and that will change, and that we need to be there when the opportunity arises. And again, to work with our state representatives who have the influence necessary to get this over the goal post or the goal line. But I'm hopeful that it's going to go somewhere, and I appreciate my colleagues coming on and co-sponsoring. It gives me hope that this will have legs going forward.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's approved. DC3, resolution to approve grants of easement for gas pipeline to DTE Company at Virginia Park and Veterans Park. Moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion, please, of DC3. Councilmember Ramlawi.
I'll be supporting this, but I will, again, like most often, throw some caution into the wind. We're allowing DTE to expand an infrastructure of supplying natural gas. I just don't know, maybe it's going to transport hydrogen, as they say in the future, or some other fuel supply. But it seems a little bit of an oxymoron to approve this and still try to wean ourselves off of natural gas and fossil fuels. It seems rather inconsistent. But maybe there's obviously there's a lot of things I don't know, and maybe there's a better use for this in the future.
Further discussion? Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that this was brought in front of the Park Advisory Commission so that they were made aware. And at least from what I read in the memorandum, it looks like it's just maintenance on the existing infrastructure. So if I'm incorrect about that, I'd encourage staff to correct me, but I think it's just improving what already exists so it doesn't fail.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. DC4, resolution to recommend discussion of right to renew by City Council, moved by Councilmember Nelson, seconded by Councilmember Radina. Discussion, please, of DC4. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. Quickly, I'm going to be tabling this, but I wanted to quickly introduce it. This is a resolution. There was some expectation that it would be a first reading. It is a resolution based on feedback from the city attorney's office. Based on some emails that we received, I think it's worth pointing out this is a topic that has been under discussion for over a year. And because it was a topic of discussion last summer, I had extensive conversations with people like Jennifer Hall, trying to understand the potential impacts and implications for our affordable housing units. I encourage everyone to look at the Legistar listing for this item. Once I was advised that this could not enter our agenda at first reading, it was suggested that I could have it enter our agenda as a communication. I declined to do that because I did want it to get more attention. I particularly want people to notice that the American Bar Association actually published a document in February of this year recommending this policy as one of 10 recommendations to prevent evictions. The only other thing that I would like to comment on, I am really excited that we have a renters commission that can wrestle with issues like this. There was some delay in putting this on our agenda because there was a hope and expectation that this was something that could be discussed in a more public forum in the context of a commission. Last summer, quite a lot of conversations were happening in small groups and one-on-one. There were a handful of people who were aware of how many attorneys in our community were giving feedback, what kind of feedback was happening back and forth with our city legal department. This is an opportunity for this to happen in a more above-board way. And I mentioned that because this was not discussed in any substantive way. This right to renew was not discussed in any substantive way at the Renters Commission until July 26th. And the last time that the Health and Human Services Advisory Board met was July 14th. So I would remind folks that when we have boards and commissions that are actually making recommendations and we report at the table what the directives are from our boards and commissions, that we pay attention to when the meetings actually happen and there are minutes and agendas related to those meetings. So I am going to move to table this, and I am looking, I will also need to mention that the legal department has told us that at the latest we are going to get a legal memo on this topic on August 26th. And so I hope to see this appear on our agenda at first reading at the latest, the first meeting in September. Thank you. And I'm moving to table it.
Is there a second? Second by Councilor Griswold. Roll call vote. I believe tabling does not require, does not provide for debate, but it is an 8-vote item. Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Briggs.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Lowy?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Sure, yes.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Radina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
DS1, resolution authorizing summary publication of ordinance 2-12 and ordinance to amend section 5.16.3.g, 5.20.10, and 5.30.1 of Chapter 55, Unified Development Code of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, amendments to marijuana facilities, trees in the public right-of-way, and landscape modifications. Moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion, please, of DS1. All in favor? Opposed? It's approved. DS2, resolution authorizing summary publication of 22-13 and ordinance to amend sections 5.16.1a, 5.16.2a, 5.16.2b, 5.16.3.j, 5.16.3.p, 5.16.4.b, 5.16.6.c, 5.16.6.g, and to repeal and replace Section 5.19 of Chapter 55, Unified Development Code of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Radina. Discussion, please, of DS2. All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. Do we have a closed session today?
We do not, Mayor.
We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report? Moved by Councilmember Radina, seconded by Councilmember Briggs. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is, the clerk's report is approved. We have communications from our city from our city attorney.
There are no communications this evening.
We have before us now public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time has expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment?
Mayor, we do have a caller on Zoom. Abdul Rahman, go ahead.
Hello. I just wanted to talk about parking minimums again. I had a little quote that I wanted to read from Man Enrique Peñalosa, and he was the mayor of Bogota, Colombia. And he did a lot of really great things to Bogota. He implemented their first BRT system. He did a lot of things with bike lanes and doing really positive urbanism. He created a whole bike lane network to help people who couldn't afford a car get around the city. And there's a really great quote that he said that I heard him say in a movie, which is many things. So he starts, many things about cities are very counterintuitive. For example, it seems to us that making bigger roads or flyovers or elevated highways will solve traffic jams. And clearly it has never been the case, because what creates traffic is on the number of cars, on the number of trips, and the length of trips. So the more road infrastructure you do, the traffic will become even worse. The only way to solve traffic jams is to restrict car use. And the most obvious way of restricting car use is restricting parking. People seem to imagine that parking is a right, almost a fundamental right, to be included in the United Nations Charter. In our Constitution, there are many rights. The right to housing, the right to education, the right to health. But I don't find the right to park. I don't see any Constitution which includes the right to park. So if you are asking me where you should park, the mayor can tell them it's almost as if you ask me where you should put your food or your clothes. This is not a government problem. And I think this quote is pretty good because it gets to the point of parking. Where should you park your car? This is not a government problem. It's your problem. And the more we build infrastructure to support cars, and then we whine about traffic and we whine about cars clogging up our street, it's a self-punishing cycle. And the issues that we have with cars and with traffic and with parking, they're all brought upon ourselves. We voluntarily did this. We widened Huron to build for cars. We built the highway ring for cars. We built Huron Parkway for cars. We built Washington that looked like that for cars. And then we get to this point where, oh, there's traffic. Where can we park? And it makes us jaded. It makes us think that other people are the enemy because of cars. And cars have just changed and poisoned the way we think so much.
30 seconds.
I think moving away from that is not only good for the environment, but good for a community, because it's not, a community isn't a collection of cars, it's a collection of people. And when we only view others as cars, and we start to dehumanize them, and I think that humanizing our community is something we really need to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, there are no other callers with their hands up.
Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Griswold.
An issue came up a few months ago regarding discrimination at drive-through windows. People wanted to be able to ride their bikes or walk up to a drive-through window. I talked to Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist about that and a number of elected officials, and Representative Yusuf Rabi is going to be introducing a bill because I think it makes more sense to have it at the state level than just have it in Ann Arbor. And there is definitely a need for this in Detroit and some of the other communities. Number two, staff's been working on Chapter 40. I plan to bring it back at the September 6th council meeting in whatever form it's in, because we have a critical situation with overgrown vegetation. You've heard me talk about that enough. I won't say it again. And the last thing is, I'm really deeply disappointed that council members continue to play political games with transportation and safety information. The Traver sidewalk that we voted down was a Traver loading zone area that engineers said was not safe. And I hope we don't have to ever discuss it again. We have children who have died in this community because of poor transportation engineering standards and the lack of crosswalks brought up to even the minimum standards in terms of lighting. And the other thing is, Councilmember Lynn Song mentioned a 50% reduction in crashes or an improvement in safety if we simply have a quick build traffic circle. You cannot use the data regarding an actual traffic circle to explain what would happen when you paint a circle in the roadway and put in some ballards. It's not the same thing. We know it's not the same thing. So let's find out what it is. Bye.
Councilmember Adina.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to briefly chime in, since I know that the motion to table is not debatable. I wanted to echo some thanks to Renters Commission members for their work over the last few weeks. I know that they held a number of special sessions to continue to have conversations around right to renew, and as we saw, it continues to be an issue of considerable passion and enthusiasm here in the community from our public speakers and those who came to support them at the beginning of the meeting as well. I do want to indicate, I know that there are also a number of additional potential tweaks and changes that might be getting made to the amendment, or to the ordinance. I know that the temporary chair of the Renters Commission is working with our city attorneys to hopefully make sure that we get the strongest and most defensible ordinance coming to us. I am looking forward to the legal analysis as well, so that we know the full picture of strengths and potential risks. But I look forward to this conversation continuing. I know that Councilmember Song brought up a desire for agencies to participate in this conversation as well, particularly those that work with some of our housing voucher tenants and things like that. And so I know that the commission is working diligently to engage with those individuals as well, to make sure that all stakeholders are engaged in this conversation. So I just wanted to thank everybody who's putting in work on this, and I know that this has been a source of community conversation for a long time, and I hope that when we get an ordinance to this table, it is one that is that's well thought out and complete, so that we can all vote on the best possible outcome. Thanks.
Further discussion? Pardon me, further communication? Councilmember Song.
I should apologize to council. So Actually, the Heart Safety Improvements 2013 through 2017 crash history that's listed on our engineering site actually lists lane conversions would have a 50% crash reduction and roundabouts a 57% crash reduction. So these materials, including public input, crash history, images, exploration of similar streets, commission packets from 2019 are all available for community to review. So it was actually 57%. Thanks.
Further communication, Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, there was a remark earlier about abdicating responsibilities, and that shouldn't, I mean, I think it's clear that this body has, in the past 18 months, abdicated all kinds of responsibilities. We've passed on the ability to comment on all sorts of things around planning and zoning, and we honestly have abdicated responsibilities for, proper notification when we affect 30,000 plus properties through text changes to our UDC. I think that's inappropriate. However, the only responsibility, our sole responsibility, charter mandated responsibility as a council member is to vote on an annual budget. And so I can say with no need to have any pride about it that I've never missed a budget vote. Last Friday, I had the pleasure of attending the Say Yes Fest on Main Street in downtown Ann Arbor. It looked like a good time was had by all. There's a kind of a flex space there that was acting as an art gallery, and then there was what's called a silent disco out in the streets, which had 3 different DJs, and you could wear your headphones and nobody else heard it, and you picked what color you had, and it was pretty cool. And I just want to thank the supporters and the sponsors and everybody who showed up for that. It really was there's clearly a group of folks in our community that are fighting really the policy decisions that this body makes that are wiping the creative class out of our town. And so the positivity that was brought by those folks and really the welcomingness of that Say Yes Fest was, it was really great. It was kind of an all ages event, even though it was a little bit later. It went till 10. But it was just really nice. So I want to thank the folks for putting that on and really getting out there and trying to bring some positivity to our community.
Further communication, Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. There won't be many opportunities for this, so I just wanted to express some thoughts I'm having. I'm looking out at council chambers in the audience, and there isn't one single person here. We have a couple officers here. We could probably go down to one. And city attorney, city administrator, and the elected body. We have nobody here. It's kind of weird. In the 4 years that I've been here, I've seen kind of like a 180. Used to come into council chambers, there used to be an engaged, energized members of the community. There used to be staff in here. It was a much different feel. And I know COVID has had a chilling effect on our abilities to get together, but I also feel our policies and the way we do business has had a chilling effect on the level of participation and involvement that our community now is involved with. And a picture's worth 1,000 words. So just take a picture of this council chamber, and I think that's the kind of involvement and engagement that we currently have outside the election process. I hope that changes. I hope for the future, for the community and for this body, that you can get back to a point where you have more than 0 here at the end of a meeting. I think it'd be better for everybody.
Further communication? Motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councilmember Iyer, second by Councilmember Adina. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.